We're ready, right? Good evening, everyone. This is the Englewood City Council study session of Monday, July 8th, 2019. And our first agenda item tonight is the food truck licensing update, and this is for information and direction. Our interim city manager, Dorothy Hargrove, is going to kick us off with some of the staff here. I appreciate the work that you've put into this, and go ahead.
All right, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, members of council. I'd like to introduce our guests if you don't happen to know them. Why don't you say your name and who you're with?
And you do need to speak right into it.
Good evening. I'm Officer Lewis. I'm the Code Enforcement Supervisor.
Are you done?
Yes.
Dick Patel, I'm with the Fire Marshal's office.
Heather Driscoll, Finance Department.
Maria Sabata, Finance Director.
Thank you very much. I also invited, and I must say at the last minute, so it's not his fault that he's not with us, Brooke Bell of our Community Development Department to talk about any zoning issues. He's given me some information, which I will be happy to share with you. And our Fire Marshal is here. If you want to pull up a chair, that would be wonderful. Thank you, Laura. Because Code Enforcement, the Fire Marshal's office, and our licensing division, as well as code enforcement, all play a part in food truck licensing. We don't really have an official presentation. I haven't asked any of our guests to make a presentation. The information in your packet, I think, summarizes our process, identifies how we compare with other cities, and I would welcome your feedback, what additional information that you need. I will highlight a couple of things. I just mentioned how we compare to other cities. I think we're very comparable. Denver has a similar process. Littleton has no licensing, no inspection requirements for food trucks at this time, though I'm told by staff that they are looking into adopting our processes because they see the need for a better oversight of food trucks in their community. The issue that you should also keep in mind that I think is a challenge is that for the health inspection, anyone who wants to operate a truck in our community needs to get a health inspection from Tri-County. And that's something we can't control. We can't control the timing, we can't control the price. There's a one-time fee as well as an annual fee that food truck operators would need to operate. And we will not license a food truck unless it has passed that health inspection. We will also not, and we cannot accept, and this is the important part, the Denver health inspection. And that's because of state statute. Now, the state legislature has addressed that issue, but not finalized a decision, making it possible for other jurisdictions to accept health inspection from Denver. But at the moment, it's Tri-Cities or nothing. So that sometimes slows people up in the process that they need to get that health inspection. Our fire inspectors, I think, are tremendously responsive. We charge nothing, correct? To do a food truck inspection, and we'll do it on very short notice. If you could talk about the day you spent making yourselves available for food truck inspections.
Sure. So we, the Fire Marshal's, we decided we would give 2 days, actually 2 half days. It was last week, but on a Monday and a Tuesday from 8 to 12, and we invited all.
Could you move the microphone right up to you? No. I think there's enough for everyone to almost have their own, so just move it up. It'll be easier for those listening at home.
Okay.
Or later.
Did you all hear what I was, okay, so we offered our service. We had myself and Mike Smith on site at our inspection site from 8 to 12 on 2 different days, and we tried to get the word out there through our communications people, and licensing, I believe, helped us out with all that. And so we made ourselves available, and we had 1 food truck come and we did the inspection for it. So
I just wanted to point that out as an example of our trying to be proactive to the food trucks in our community. I will say that the zoning issue, the municipal code, has some restrictions and requires a temporary use permit. That's $150 for the year for two 60-day periods. They don't have to be consecutive. You could have food truck special use permit every weekend throughout the year, something like that. But that is a restriction in the municipal code. The business, actually, not the food truck, can apply for that code and that exemption, if I understand that correctly. So that is a hurdle, but Denver has much the same thing. I think theirs is a 50-foot setback from any residential area, and I could look at the chart, but a certain amount of feet from any other food establishment. So that's a very common type of restriction. So I think our fees are lower and very much in line with other municipalities, certainly of our size. I think it would be very helpful if I could put Heather on the spot, and if you could reiterate a little of what you had learned and shared at the symposium, because I thought that was very helpful.
Yes, absolutely. So Mike Smith from Fire, Lorna Elliott, who is our licensing and business technician, and myself all attended Denver's food truck symposium back in April that they hosted to try to get food trucks to come in and complete their inspection and licensing process, as well as they had food handling prep classes, a class on what's required to get licensed in Denver, what their fire requirements are. I learned a whole lot about food trucks that I never thought I would ever know. So I'm gaining more and more knowledge with it. And so with it, what we learned is they had a veteran food truck panel, and it was definitely more geared towards people who are looking at entering the food truck industry. But I did seize that opportunity because they had 3 food trucks up there to ask, because none of those food trucks that were there are currently licensed with our city. And I asked them, why aren't they licensed with us? You know, are we too complex? Is there not enough business? What's the reason? And at that point, I was informed that a lot of businesses are now offering guaranteed minimums to get food trucks to come, which is something that most businesses do except for breweries, which I was kind of shocked to find out. But one food truck said that, and the other 2 concurred. So that was a big point of enlightenment for us. And then we got to have a lot of time with Denver's Excise and License Division, which does specifically their business license for food trucks. And then with that, they work cohesively with Denver's Public Health Division, as well as Denver's Fire Department, to do licensing. They're able, since they're all kind of one big unit, to have everything kind of done in-house, whereas we have Tri-County, and then we have our fire division, but Tri-County is the only part that we really have outside of our municipality. And with that, we are able to accept any state-regulated health agency. So we can accept a Jefferson County health inspection because they're state-regulated. Denver's health inspection cannot be accepted by Tri-County because Denver's health department is not state-regulated. Is regulated only by Denver. So that's kind of the hiccup with that, and that's not our call, that's Tri-County's call. And so we have to follow that rule. There's even a whole page of information about that on Tri-County's website. And so I feel that we're not the only ones that encounter that. And so with the excise and license, they have very similar questions, everything that's required on their applications like us. One thing that I found interesting is they never tell you you have to get a tax license. You have to research that yourself and then go to a different website to apply for a tax license, whereas ours is all via the same website, which is our MuniRev site that we have. And so you actually start your business license, and then we add what we call a workflow, and so that's how they become a food vendor with us, and so that's when they submit all the required documentation to us. And so we're pretty much on par with other municipalities on that. And in the course of learning everything, we had heard that, you know, Littleton doesn't have this, Littleton doesn't have that. So I called and spoke with the city of Littleton's licensing technician, and she said that they've had one food truck, and they are required to have a tax license and collect and remit tax, but they've had issues with that food truck. So they're actually looking at regulations getting into place because they want to not have issues. And so the fact that we have the regulations that we have are really good because it contributes to the health and safety of both our citizens and the patrons of these food trucks.
Thank you, Heather. Would you like to say something, Dave, about code's involvement, very briefly, in food trucks?
So code enforcement's been tasked with the enforcement component, making sure that the licensing is in place for anybody that is vending. We receive complaints from a number of ways, either from a city employee, such as referral from tax, a referral from the fire department, or from citizens. We've received 13 complaints in the last year in reference to food trucks and vendors. And I can report that a majority of those calls that have come in have come directly from business owners or restaurant owners who have asked that they be held to the same standards as a restaurant or a business.
Thank you. I hope that all this information in the packet has been useful. Is there anything else that you'd like to emphasize before we ask council for questions? Okay, with that, with that brief summary, I'll open it up and see what questions we can answer for council.
Any questions, council? Member Wink?
Thank you, Mayor. To Supervisor Lewis, of the 13 complaints you received from business owners, do you mean all of them were received in calendar year 2019?
Within the last 12 months.
12 months, okay. And then the complaints you said were basically around wanting the food trucks to operate more similarly to restaurants. Is there a component of lack of education on the restaurant owners' parts, or were their complaints actually viable?
So there were two components. The restaurant owners wanted to know what the requirements are for food trucks.
Okay.
So we would take the opportunity to educate them on our process. And number two, take an opportunity to educate the food trucks on what the process is if they were found to be vending without the authorized license.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I might have another question later.
Member Sierra?
So I just want to know what the difference would be if a food truck wanted to set up shop, let's say outside of the Bob on the 3400 South Broadway. Is there any differences between them trying to set up there versus just one block north on the 3300 block?
There would be no difference in the city of Englewood as long as they had a license to vend in the city of Englewood, barring any parking restrictions. There are some parking restrictions on certain blocks for timeframes.
Okay, so that was going to be one of my questions. So time frame, and then also, do they need to get permission from any of the restaurants in the area?
Food trucks currently do not need to have permission to vend in a public space as long as they have the license to vend.
Could I add a note on that? As part of our license to vend, we do require a property owner authorization. So if they're going to park on the street in front of a house or a business, we do require authorization from that business, because we don't want, you know, Heather's Tacos parking in front of Maria's Tacos and taking business away from that storefront, or blocking somebody from knowing that there might be an antique shop that they might miss if there's a food truck there. So we do require that to make sure that that business storefront is okay with that food truck being there. And that's something that's also required by the city of Denver.
Member Barentine?
Whoever you talk to in Littleton needs to get out in Littleton a little bit more, because there is a lot more than one food truck that I've personally been to in Littleton. Jake's normally has somebody out there. It's a different one each time, but we go down there and walk around. So I'd like a little bit more information on, anecdotal is kind of a little difficult. The resident issue is just as much an issue on the 3400 block of Broadway as it is on the 4300 block for Barnhouse Tap. And that's that it says that it can't be within 50 feet of a residence. There are residents that are right above the Bob. There are residents that live right all along Broadway, which would actually exclude that entire area, which might be why this council probably should go ahead and take a look at some of those ordinances, because that would eliminate everybody, basically, unless you had a private, well, even if you had a private party at your residence, because you're at a residence and it's within 50 feet then. Part of the complaint that we got, and one of the things that I'm somewhat disappointed about, is that we didn't have any vendors, the people who've come and complained to us about the issues with our licensing and the enforcement of it, somewhat heavy-handed, that they're not being represented for why they are not coming here and doing the licenses. One of the biggest complaints that I had was that we have, where they get licensed elsewhere, that they're not location-specific licenses. This would require that every single time they change location, they submit another plan or get another license, because they would need the permission of wherever they're moving to. I don't know if any of you guys have seen like food truck wars or stuff. I mean, they're, quite honestly, you're not entitled to exclusive rights to the public right away. So if 4 trucks show up or whatever, that's kind of the way that whole business thing works. So I think this is going to need a little bit more look into it. I appreciate the symposium you went to. However, why-ever those, I have no idea that they're saying that they don't want to go into Inglewood because they don't have a guaranteed minimum. There's no explanation for that. I'd need a little bit more information to honor the complaints that have been made, which have been numerous, about why we can't move forward with this. And if we just keep saying that it's fine and it's okay, we're not addressing the problem, because there's a problem and they're not licensing and coming in. So I still think we need to go ahead and get a little bit more information. I appreciate all of you doing the work that you did on this, but unfortunately, what we have presented here isn't going to solve the problem. For the fire marshal, have code enforcement said that you provide complaints on food trucks to them? Have you filed complaints on a food truck with code enforcement?
Not filed complaints, but when we get complaints, we pass them along as well.
Have you gotten complaints regarding fire issues?
Not complaints on our end, no.
Oh, okay.
You know, we work with people, like we said, we've set up for 2 days for the 4th of July and make ourselves available pretty much when anyone calls for food truck
And then
inspections.
I guess I am kind of concerned anytime a business can complain about another business and say, just get rid of them, because I think that their competition is somewhat concerning. So I hope that we're getting that information out there accurately.
I will say on a plan review side of things, it's more of a trend. Instead of putting in commercial kitchens, it's more affordable for food trucks than commercial kitchens and fire sprinkler systems. So with these pop-up bars and breweries, instead of serving food, which they have to make it available, food trucks are an option. So it's more of a trend that food trucks serve instead of doing commercial kitchens. So it's something we see often, and we just make sure that they have the proper electrical outlets on the exterior of their building, and make sure that they know that there are regulations that go with food trucks instead of doing a commercial kitchen. So it's something we see quite often. We just make sure that they know that they can't park the trucks there as a permanent option to a commercial kitchen.
Thank you. We only have a couple minutes left, and so Member Martinez.
I understand we have a property owner authorization kind of checklist here. How would that work if, say, an individual wanted to have a party at a park or something like that? Who would be the property owner to authorize that? Would it just be an individual? And I don't know how it would work if it were at a location such as a park.
I can answer that in terms of our parks. We don't allow food trucks in our parks currently by regulation. If it's a private property, they'll need a temporary use permit per code. public right-of-way is a third option, and that's not considered the park. That would be a street.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Member Cuesta?
Thank you, Mayor. Going back to Littleton, so as you understand it right now, they don't have any oversight under food trucks, is what they expressed to you when you communicated with them?
That is correct when I spoke with them back in March.
So to that note, there's no requirement that a local municipality has oversight over food trucks. I'm assuming they would be outside of the boundaries of that regulation, a state regulation, that a local municipality must have oversight over food trucks as well.
I would say it's depending on their own municipal code, what their code is set up to say.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you. Manager Hargrove, is there anything more that you want from us? Oh, Mayor Pro Tem has a question.
I just have a question. Were food trucks allowed at Bellevue Park for the 4th of July event?
Yes, with the proper licensing.
Okay, so is that
For-
a special?
It's a special event. I mean, we don't allow food trucks when we rent out the pavilions, for instance.
Okay.
And that could change, if city council instructed us otherwise. But right now, that is the regulation that we've been following.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any further direction you want from us tonight, or is it really just, would you like anything further?
Well, I would point out that one of the charts associated in the packet, the City of Englewood food truck applications, gives good information on everybody who has approached our licensing bureau and lots of detail about the follow-up. So there are some comments from vendors who did not finalize the procedure about what they found cumbersome or challenging. But I hope you would agree with me if you read that carefully that our staff is very proactive on that. It's not exclusive, but there's good information there. Thank you.
Member Barentine?
On this licensing chart, this application chart, could you show me where it allows for the special permit? You said it's not allowed in parks, and then, of course, there's, requirements for residential and everything. Where on this chart is the opportunity to do a special permit?
This chart is only for food trucks that are not participating in special events. So this is for anybody who wanted to participate for, you had mentioned Barn House or something like that. So these are those type of food trucks that are.
Could I please, I would like to get the requirements for somebody doing a special permit, because since that's not included in the information that we have, and we could, go past the park restriction and the resident restriction, and what it's looking like is if it's a city event. And so I would like to know that special permitting would be available to everybody, not just when the city wants to do it. So if we could get that information, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. I think that could end the session. Do you have enough information? It seems like we want a little bit more about when there are special events. And then I think if you think some of the, if we need to broaden some of this to, let's say, special neighborhood events that might be adjacent to a park, what would be that process? I know some neighborhoods that have asked and thought about it. I don't think they figured out how to mobilize themselves to do that, but I know other neighborhoods around the city, a metro area do that. I would like to know how would we go about that so we can encourage that kind of thing. But I wanted to thank you because this has a lot of information, and for those maybe that aren't looking at it, that does have all the food trucks on here. They have been noted and when they've come in, what the status is, and notes about what their feedback was. So there has been some ongoing conversations. Thank you very much for your time. Oh, yep, one more.
I had a clarifying question, actually, to the council. So the information that we provided as far as the food truck applications are the individuals that we are aware that actually tried to go through the process. I think earlier it was mentioned that there might have been some that wanted to apply and didn't. And more information was asked to be given. I'm not certain how we can respond to that without knowing who those individuals are. So I guess I ask, is there additional information that you'd like to share with us that we can research as to food truck owners that didn't go through the process, that are complaining about the process that we're not aware of, that aren't on this list?
I didn't hear that tonight. I heard that Littleton has more than one truck. At least one of our members said that. So I don't know I didn't hear anybody. But if you all do know of a truck that isn't listed here, would you please send that on to the city manager so that they can deal with what the issues were.
I appreciate that.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Thanks for clarifying. Wonderful. Thanks for all
Thank
of
you all.
coming and for what you do day in and day out for this. Our next item up is Agenda Item 2, Flood Study Discussion with Calibre. This is an information direction time, and Public Works Director Maria DeAndre is here to discuss the flood-prone area and the stormwater feasibility and alternative study.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'll let the PowerPoint get up to speed here. I do have with me tonight Greg Murphy, who's the project manager serving on this project from Calibre Engineering. So in case we have any detailed questions, we can certainly refer to him. So with that, I'll get started. So we do have a slide presentation, which I'll walk through briefly, and then be able to open this up for questions from City Council and discussion. Our purpose tonight really is to, one, follow up from the June 11th study session, where we walked council through the study and some of the different elements within that, and we're asked to provide additional information back to you, which we'll do. And then specifically tonight, we'd like to talk about or get direction from City Council on a preferred course of action. So both for the short term for the remainder of 2019 into 2020, as well as then long term over the next probably 5 or so years. So the items that we wanted to talk about or were asked about at the June 10th study session was making the website available to the public, specifically talking about the number of homes or listing out those number of homes by the depth of inundation. So how much water is up against the foundation in a particular storm event. Then Mr. Murphy had mentioned about this transformative project through South Englewood Basin, where we would potentially acquire more property to widen out that greenway that's already in place and to provide additional stormwater detention through that area. And then finally talking about options. So within the flood-prone areas, staff has laid out 3 options. We've also made a recommendation. And so we'd like to walk through the details of that with council and again receive some direction back. So with that, there were 3 elements of the study. It was that Calibre undertook. One was completing a life safety assessment of the flood-prone areas and identifying some flood-proofing techniques that could be done on private property. Conducting the study of the outlet pipe along Oxford Avenue all the way to the South Platte River. And finally, updating the 1999 Stormwater Outlet Systems Plan and identifying and prioritizing capital infrastructure projects. So again, we had walked through a lot of those details at the June 10th meeting. I won't go over again the study goals and objectives, but it's related to those 3 areas and really looking at, what I think the results of the study show is that there's an undersized stormwater system collection within the city. And that the piping system, that's really the main cause of the flooding, is that the pipes are not adequate enough to carry the water, and that this situation could be dramatically improved by constructing an expanded or larger storm sewer system. And that means nearly all of the existing pipes within those flood-prone areas would need to be enlarged. So dug up and made bigger. And then finally, in locations where the deepest flooding is occurring, additional actions above and beyond just replacing the storm sewer pipes need to occur to protect homes from damage, as well as to protect life safety of occupants. So again, the study area isn't the entire city. It's focused on about 3.4 square miles of what we call the flood-prone areas, which were initially identified back in 1998. And so that comprises about 3.5 square miles of the city. Overall, we're about 6.6 square miles, so this represents just about half. The study website was put up on the day after the study session. So we have made that available both through the city webpage, and you can connect on the link itself and go directly to the study through Calibre's website. Inundation of habitable buildings. So again, this was a question that came from council. You can see there both in the 10-year storm event and the 25-year storm event how many properties we're talking about. And the lists of actual addresses were provided. So I do want to just caution a little bit that the flood study is, and I'll let Mr. Murphy speak to this a little bit, is that it doesn't necessarily, get specifics, because there's a lot of issues like fences and other details that can contribute to whether or not how much flooding is occurring at a property. So Greg, I don't know if you want to take that on and explain a little bit further.
Yeah, so the work that we did was in much greater detail than the last outfall systems plan in 1999. It included some much more sophisticated statistical models and mathematical models. And so we have better information, but that information is still limited by the kinds of details that you can get around any given house. We're talking macro analysis and not micro. So for example, there's one house kind of in one of the deeper areas of flooding where there's an alley, and the alley has fences on both sides of it. So the water gets into this alley and it's running down the alley, and then there's a particular house that has a wide opening where there's no fence. And so as water starts building up against fences and can't move in the direction it wants to, when it gets to that driveway, it can shoot into that driveway and create more flooding at particular locations. So when we say there's 25 or 27 properties in the 10 and 25-year condition, that's based on some statistical analysis. It's not based on detailed analysis of individual fences and what happens if the fence breaks and those kinds of things. So in many cases it can be worse than that. And so I think the caution is, if we're going to use some of these numbers to develop policy, let's be a little bit careful and kind of widen that out and consider what sorts of other impacts there might be in those adjacent properties or in properties in the immediate vicinity.
Thank you. So this graphic shows the Transformative Flood Mitigation Greenway project that Mr. Murphy had talked about last time. And you can see there, basically it takes the existing greenway and expands it both to the west and north, all the way almost up into the industrial area. They're just south and west of Hampton and 85, and then extends it south and east across Broadway all the way down to essentially Duncan Park. So the idea is that this was an extension of what the original greenway might have looked like, or the existing drainage way was likely before homes were developed, that this was the natural channel through which water was traversing, and so restoring it in some fashion back so that it goes back to what it was originally intended.
Director Jandra, do you want us to hold on questions, or do you want to take them one by one as they come up?
Completely up to you, Mayor.
It might be easier if we get through what you want to get through, and then let's ask, okay?
Okay.
I think that would help us all see everything, and then the public too.
Okay.
But member Sierra, I saw your light this time, which sometimes is dim. Not his fault.
So I think some of the aspects of this project is that the intent is to create more space, more open space for channelization and conveyance of that drainage way. So we would need to acquire properties somewhere in the range of 90 to 100. And that would take a long time. So there's a lot of not only financial issues, but legal, that idea of taking property, which is a big policy decision for City Council. So I think that's why we're not recommending this project as staff, but we did want to bring this back for consideration if Council wanted to take something on. But it is a very large undertaking. And, the rough cost estimate associated with that reflects that. So that number of 62.5 million reflects not only the acquisition and the demolition of those properties, but then also the construction that would need to occur to convey that water.
As an overview, is that a good place to stop?
Sure.
For Q&A? Okay, Q&A now. Member Sierra first, then Mayor Pro Tem next.
No, and actually that's going to be my comment about the Greenway project, just because I noticed that it wasn't a priority based on the Calibre report. And it seemed to me that this was more of a discussion point because it was asked by council on the June 10th meeting. So this is not something that Calibre even recommends, nor is it something that I believe council has an appetite for. So I don't want to really get bogged down in actually talking too much about this aspect of the report, because there is something more important with the three options that I would rather spend a majority of the time talking about.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
And the question that I had is, why did we even consider this? Because, I mean, Mr. Murphy had said in his report that that was not a wise thing to consider. So I was just curious why this was brought forward, and I don't necessarily want to get bogged down here either, because I don't think council has an appetite for it either.
Certainly. I think it was in the give and take of the discussion on June 10th that was just thrown out as an idea if we really wanted to go big. If we were looking at the potential, I think in the context, we were talking about the 100-year storm event, what could be done potentially to allow for something like that, for a much greater kind of impact. But as you can see in number of properties, the cost associated with that has caused us, we wanted to follow up because we did talk about it, but it's not something that we would recommend.
Can I ask one more question? Or
I actually want to do one at a time because I think it could take us a while. Let's do one at a time and then come back. I don't know which of you was first, so Member Martinez?
Yeah, I don't really think we have an appetite for this either, but it's good to
Member
talk-
Martinez, I think you might need to pull it even closer.
It's good to talk about all the options while we're discussing the options. But with that, how impactful would it be, say, a handful of property owners did want us to purchase their house, say maybe 5 or 10 or just a handful? How impactful would that be?
I think you mean in this area?
In this scenario, yeah.
Yeah, it really have to be concentrated. So in order to get that impact. So if
That
we
was
did.
my question too, because what if it's, say a whole block and only one house? Is that really,
Exactly.
gonna do any good?
Yeah, so if you had one person who didn't want to participate, and we'll talk about some other of the property, voluntary property kind of opportunities in the options. But for this, the idea is that you have to build more capacity. And so therefore you would need a concentration of enough homes to get enough basically bang for your buck.
Got it, thank you.
Thank you. Member Wink?
Thank you, Mayor. What would the time cost be for this 90 to 100 property scenario?
Yeah.
You said a long time, but
It would. Well, I think it would have to then depend on how aggressive city
Yeah.
council would be.
the prioritization versus other projects and the funding, of
Exactly.
course,
And having been through a number of cases where we acquired right away for roadway construction, so it takes a long time to acquire property. Even with people who don't necessarily want to oppose it, it still takes a long time because you're getting appraisals, you're negotiating essentially with each of those property owners. So I don't have an exact time, but it does take a number of years just to acquire that. And if you have some holdouts, as you inevitably would,
right,
then it takes,
longer.
how much, again, fortitude is there to continue that project, and then you would have to construct after that.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Berenstein?
The last time you presented, you said that there were, I thought it was 88 homes to do some of the Greenbelt. That's now expanded. And of course, there's concern in the community because they've already heard on the news the 51 million and buying 100 homes. And I have no doubt that that might be part of the reason that we have some extra audience here tonight. But there are, in the concentrations that you brought up last time, especially where we had the death last year and the flooding that comes off of Broadway through that area to Rotolo Park, where you can walk that area and see how that was intended. I mean, there's concrete there by those homes where they were allowed to build, where there's those 2 homes, and then it goes in, and then to Rotolo Park, where it breached even this last storm. So it's not like it takes that much rain for it to actually have a problem. And then going through the Jason, to Jason, where that street has collapsed and had a sinkhole, I don't know, according to those people over there, 6, 7 times. Guys lived there 2 years, and he says 6, 7 times they've already come and replaced that. So we already know that there's kind of this concentration. So an area like that, if we said, okay, we've got a little bit more buy-in here to Councilmember Martinez's issue, maybe that would be something that we could focus on as a project that might include some homes, but also that kind of greenbelt area. What would that include? I was just asking him
okay.
because he had presented part
Sure.
of that last time, which was a little different than this, although the map is still too small for anybody to really read. But you had presented a little bit of that kind of idea for an area like that where it's very specific. And then that's what's leading into the Oxford pipe and the sinkhole that, I mean, trying to get that water to the plant. So that seems to be a very problematic area on the south end there. So you had addressed some of that before. What did you?
So are you talking about just in the vicinity of Rotolo Park, kind of between Rotolo and?
As I've walked that area, yes, the drainage was, that alley is part of the drainage. Broadway is part of the drainage. Those homes are part of the drainage. You can see where there's concrete poured, where it's supposed to go, and then keep flowing over to Rotolo Park and then down and then into the Platte. And that seems to be the most stressed area that ends up causing those additional sinkhole on several areas, and the biggest one being the one on Oxford.
Yeah, and in that particular area along Acoma and Bannock.
Can you speak into the mic a little bit?
Yeah, the area along Acoma and Bannock, that's where the deepest flood is, and those are the areas where if you did have a voluntary buyback or some kind of program where you're purchasing homes, that would be the place to focus them. I think we would still end up doing the same storm sewer projects, but yeah, those are the ones that you'd want to target, is where you've got that really highly concentrated, deeper flow.
I thought you had a number of homes that you had assessed in order to do that process for that, to take that burden off of that very stressed, causing us the most problems over the years area. I thought you had some idea of what that would entail, because it wasn't that much.
The only number I remember mentioning was I just took a rough guess, kind of counting the number of blocks all the way down to Santa Fe at 88 homes or something like that. That's the only one I remember talking about. Do you remember?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. And my second question goes along that same line, because the last time we met with you on June 10th, we talked about there are a few homes, a handful of homes, that there is no amount of things that they can do to flood-proof them. And I think that it would be wise for this council to consider policy. I mean, when I was reading the 2010 emergency operation plan, it talks in there about protecting life and safety of the public. And so I think that I like what you just said, that those are the homes that we need to consider, but we would still, I'm assuming the recommendation is to replace pipes. So thank you, that answers my question.
It seems like we're getting into projects, so let's plow into that right now.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So as we talked about, there were 13 projects identified. And again, as I mentioned earlier, those were basically enlarging of existing pipes. So And there were some detention areas that we could create to hold back some of that water, such as in Jason Park, Rotolo Park, and I believe it was Duncan was mentioned. So those projects were prioritized based on Calibre's evaluation that, you know, how much essentially working from the downstream to the upstream and several other criteria. And the recommended project for the top priority was S1, which is the line from the South Platte River to Navajo, which is just on the east side of 85 underneath the bridge there on Oxford. So getting into the project options, there were 4 elements that were considered, and there's actually a jump ahead here. I know this is very small, but I included the slightly larger graphic as an attachment as well. So this really talks about, this matrix talks about 4 different elements that could be considered that came out of the Calibre study. And so it's really about, you know, getting feedback tonight from council as to whether there's an appetite for doing some of these elements, maybe mixing and matching. These were just staff's opinion. And so, you know, we could eliminate some of them, enhance some of them, mix and match as you all like. And those elements are flood proofing of private property, doing improvements to the Oxford Avenue outlet pipe, the capital projects implementation, those 13 capital projects that were identified through the Calibre study. And finally, this was added by staff, was some sort of voluntary property acquisition program, with the idea being to Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Barentine, and even to what Councilwoman Martinez talked about, is not necessarily acquiring properties to provide additional detention, but taking those properties that are where flood proofing would not be effective, and so that they have so much water essentially in a certain storm event that the most effective, cost-effective method is, rather than putting in even larger pipes to try and protect them, would be to acquire those properties. That would be completely voluntary, so the property owner would have to come to the city. And so tonight what we want to talk about as one of the discussion elements is city council amenable to that idea, because we don't want to go too far down that road if there's not a desire to further discuss that. So again, we provided some lists in there. Those lists are not at all meant to be that that's the criteria by which we evaluate that. To Mr. Murphy's point, there's a lot of specifics for particular properties that might cause them to have a higher inundation than simply what you can tell by looking at the hydraulic analysis. So I won't spend too much time. I'll get into the options a little bit here. Option A is where we would, if people wanted to come forward and do flood proofing on their properties, that could be installing watertight egress windows, raising up their foundation, or some sort of protection around their foundation by grading within their property, something like that. Then they would come to the city and be reimbursed up to 50% for those costs. So there would be a split, and it would be a reimbursement after the fact once we verify that those improvements were put in conjunction with something that would actually physically help the property. And we identified, if you recall, when we talked about the floodproofing, Calibre had gone out and looked at about 700 properties, and they identified them as critical, high, or medium risk. And so we're focused on those critical, high, and medium risk properties for the recommendation. Then finally, doing all the capital projects that have been identified, spreading those over the next 10 years. And then, I said that, and then the estimated cost for that is about $50 million. And again, that would have that voluntary program. We'd have to establish what are the criteria for how we would do something like that, and that would take more discussion. Option B would to be, since we're spreading it over a 15-year period, now it's a much longer time, because of the higher costs, we would also then raise our flood-proofing reimbursement up a little bit higher, because we know that people would have to wait longer to have those larger pipes installed. So there's a little bit higher cost associated with that. And then the other element there is that the capital projects we would, so remember we talked about either doing a 10-year event protection or 25-year. This would be a 10-year event, as would option A. I forgot to mention that. And finally, C has we would implement the 25-year event, so the pipes that are even larger than the 10-year event. That would be implemented over a 10-year period, and we would again flood-proof reimbursement at 50%, but then you can see the higher cost associated with that, which comes from the larger pipes. So with that, getting into the staff recommendations, I do want to mention, before we go on too far, I made, in the memo, it talks about transferring $3 million. We had talked on our May 11th, 2019 budget meeting, that there was $3 million that could potentially be used from our capital projects fund in some way towards stormwater. And so I mistakenly used the term of transferring that $3 million from the public improvement fund to the stormwater fund. And Ms. Sabata reminded me that we cannot do that. So I want to just clarify that the terminology that I used was incorrect. And really, though, I think there's opportunities there to use general fund money for perhaps floodproofing, property acquisition, that sort of thing, but they perhaps even like that we could justify the surfacing, the repaving of a road, but the actual pipes still have to come from the stormwater fund. So wanted to clarify that. But we could potentially have some money to do some immediate actions within 2019 and 2020. And the recommendation from staff, if that's the dollar amount we're kind of talking about, was that we would establish that floodproofing program with kind of seed money of $500,000 to start out with. And then we would use, we would also clean out the Oxford pipe, which is, as we know, it has in areas 32 inches of sediment built up in it, and complete that phase 2 assessment of the pipe to see what needs to be done next. And then also design and construct a portion of the project S3, which is around the Tufts and Clarkson area, to see how much we could enlarge at least those pipes. The 3 million, or the 2.5 in this case, I also looked at, or we talked about potentially doing a portion of the pipe along Oxford, like let's say upgrading the section that's 78 inches, but it's more than the $3 million. Similarly, doing something in the S2 area, which would be the next priority based on Calibre's list, is not feasible, because then we're putting more water into the Oxford pipe, which already can't handle the water that's already there. So S3 would be the next logical segment that we could potentially do, because the outlet goes into that Greenway at Clarkson, just north of Tufts. So again, we would want to move forward with that. Also, then I wanted to mention in terms of financing that we currently have just under $1 million as of the end of the year. We have $945,000 roughly in our stormwater fund. And the intent then is, if we wanted to do anything more other than this $3 million, is that we would need to increase rates and go out for bonding against that rate increase. And we could do that immediately. So there's no need. Ms. Sabata has confirmed with our bond counsel, as well as our the people who have done our bonds in the past, Stifle, that for an enterprise fund, we do not have to wait for an election to have a vote of the people. Instead, City Council can authorize that at any time. So we could move forward with that if there was a desire to move forward with projects sooner rather than later. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. And again, I'm going to ask that we each ask one question so everyone gets them, because I know we probably have 10 each. So we'll just keep going one by one. Member Sierra starts out.
I'll start first with the Oxford pipe. So I know the recommendation is for a 10-year pipe within Oxford as well, but there seems to be at least a section that is a 25-foot pipe.
Currently, correct.
So does it make sense for us to move forward with the 10-year pipe, knowing that there is a portion that is a 25-year pipe? Do we potentially create other bottlenecks because I believe that 25-foot 8-foot pipe is in the middle. So then then would move to a 10-year pipe before it drains off to the South Platte. So does it make sense for us to move forward with the 10-year pipe in that area?
I think that's an excellent point, is that we should, and just because it's the downstream, if you will, it's the drain for the entire south and south central basins, upgrading the pipe, if we're already going to be doing it, we might as well look at the larger pipe. I think the segment that you're referring to, though, is where we have the sediment buildup. So we still need to get in there, make sure that we don't have to replace that pipe as well as a part of this project. So the assumption in here is that we would replace the entire length, but to your point, we should look at 25-year versus the 10-year for that segment.
Thank you. Member, you finished? Yeah. Member Barentine and then Member Cuesta.
And obviously, some of the issues with the Oxford pipe from your study are different now because there's a big sinkhole there. And in going back, and in all fairness to you, 20/20 hindsight is a lot easier. I know there's a problem with the pipe. I know it's going to fail because it did, and there's a big sinkhole there. But it wasn't necessarily going to be a surprise either. It's 4 major events and 6 failures in that line. But in going back on the report, we didn't get, you didn't get the urgency of what was going to happen, and now we know did happen. What piece of that in inspecting it was the problem where we didn't have that? My concern is that we've just got done with this study for $170,000, and I want to make sure that, and since that isn't an immediate emergency that you saw potentially happening, then could you maybe address why that might not have been foreseen a little bit more in your inspection of it, and what other areas we might have some concern about? Also, how valid is this information that we're being presented on the Oxford pipe, given the current situation that's now happened?
So the study that was done, we didn't want to leave the impression that it wasn't urgent. In fact, that was our #1 priority project, was the Oxford pipe. It's clearly had problems in the past, and the problems that it's had are immediate life safety concerns. So I absolutely agree with you that that's an urgent project to do. So I want to make sure that that's clear, that was maybe not identified clearly enough in the report, but that's absolutely our opinion.
And if you could point out the piece in the report where you believe that gave any kind of, I mean, it was an important project, but not that kind of urgency where we had that kind of understanding that we had that much earth moving down from there. The same thing with the Jason, where that sinkhole developed at that same time from that water coming from Rotella Park, wasn't really identified in this information.
Well, the pipe conditions assessment report was not the life safety component of the report. The life safety component was the other piece, and so the life safety component did identify that as the #1 priority project. I think the issues with evaluating conditions of the Oxford pipe fully include the fact that it's in some places 50% full of debris, and so we know that that's got to be cleaned out before we can even see the bottom. You can't really evaluate the conditions until you can see the bottom of the pipe. And then the other thing that we were going to do is...
Just to what you just said, could you just give me the site so that I could go back and reread that if I missed something? Where is the information where it's 50% full on there?
Can I get back to you with
Sure,
that?
I would appreciate that, because I didn't see that piece of it, or and if you could also identify where you're talking, where you bring to our attention the erosion to the point where you think there's going to be failure of that pipe underneath there. Also, if there's any reference to any concerns for the potential problems that the, having it be a dump area around there might have caused, or the construction of River Point as well. So if you could just point those out at some point, I'd appreciate you sharing that with us.
Thank you. Go ahead.
And just to kind of follow up on that too, I think one of the elements that we saw with this last sinkhole that developed is the surcharging that occurs. So the pipe itself, the 78-inch, which is this segment between 85 and River Point Parkway, that's where all of these sinkholes have occurred. And talking to Mr. Brennan, our utilities director, it's the larger pipe coming into the narrower pipe right there, and then widening out again to a larger pipe, so that bottleneck, and so that surcharging, that kind of pressure within that corrugated metal pipe is what's helping cause the results of the sinkholes, and that might not necessarily be recognized when you're in there inspecting the pipe, that it's under a surcharge condition when these things happen.
Thank you. Member Cuesta.
Thank you, Mayor. And this question could go to either Director or DeAndrea or Mr. Murphy. Option A is based on a 10-year event, and it would take 10 years to implement. Option B is a 10-year event, 15-year period to implement, and then the final is C, with both A and B having a detention. Final is C, it's a 25-year event with a 10-year implemented for 10 or 25 years.
Well, new development areas are built for a 100-year event. So again, we're trying to retrofit in a condition where not a lot of thought was given to where stormwater would be conveyed or withheld. And so it's really harder, much harder than in, let's say, out in the area near the airport, to implement stormwater drainage facilities where there's not a lot of room to do that. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, storm sewer systems are generally nowadays designed for 10-year frequency, 2 to 10 years. At the time frame when this was done, it was probably designed to a 2-year. But what was not done, and what Maria is talking about with the 100-year that's done, is really in areas like this where there is no drainage way outfall, and you've got to carry all the water in the storm sewer system, then it's designed for 100-year. So typically, the way this is laid out, first of all, you would never do that way, but if you did, it would be 100-year.
I think Member Martinez is next.
I have a two-part question. It's one question with two parts.
Go ahead.
Okay. So how quickly could the Oxford pipe be cleaned out and assessed?
We feel we can do that relatively quickly this fall.
Okay.
Yeah. And get somebody in here relatively quickly. It will probably be very manual. We can't obviously get a lot of equipment, so it would be probably people down there bucketing it out by hand.
Sure. And then the second part to that is how long would it take to totally rebuild that pipe there at a 25-year capacity, which I think is at least preferred?
Certainly. I think that's a great question. So the size I've brought down here, the size of the pipe for a 25-year storm event would be 2 12-foot by 7-foot reinforced concrete box culverts. So 12 feet wide by 7 feet high, 2 of those laid side by side. So a lane is 12 feet, a lane of traffic is 12 feet wide. So we're talking about 2 lanes of traffic with all that's underneath there is stormwater. So we know for a fact from just from our other repair work that's gone in there, we have a lot of utilities, water mains, CenturyLink, Xcel Energy that would need to be relocated. And then also we have a lot of traffic control. There's a lot of traffic control going through that area. So to answer your question, it's a very difficult and complex project. We would likely look at phasing it, so taking it from the west side of US 85 all the way to the river, so not getting into CDOT right away as much as we can, because we know we can't open cut the intersection of Santa Fe and Oxford, so we would likely have to jack a pipe, which means pushing a pipe underneath the roadway in some fashion. We also have the railroad on the east side, which is very difficult to work with and difficult to get an easement to do that. So I would really look at the complications with CDOT and the railroad, while not unovercomable, if that's a word, but they would take much longer. But yet the project going even from the west side of 85 to the river still is very complex in the sense of moving traffic while you're building it, moving all those utilities even before you can get in and start laying the pipe down. It is 15 feet deep about as well. So we're talking a very deep excavation with a lot of traffic running through the area. So again, a very complex project. But, you know, if we started on the design, you know, we could probably start construction, talking very roughly off the top of my head, probably end of 2020, beginning of 2021, conservatively.
So at least a couple years, probably.
Yeah,
Okay.
at least a year.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Member Wink.
Thank you, Mayor. So in looking at the near-term proposed project details compared to the 5-year options we have in that matrix, so I've looked at the program timeline farther along in the presentation. I know that this is associated with the cost limitation in terms of the near-term work we can do. However, I am concerned about having to go to S3 for the near term when we've prioritized a couple of other areas much higher. However, I'm wondering what we can do to discuss other funding, if there's anything we've not yet looked at such that we can incorporate something higher on the priority list, which comes from analysis and some thorough research. However, as you suggested, you know, looking at the options from the matrix, perhaps because I'm wondering what we can do within the matrix for the longer term work to accommodate if we are really unable to, you know what I mean, to make both of them work, maybe front load, so look at the 10-year instead of more of the 15-year options, so that it's sooner for the near term work. Is everybody following me? So that we can approach some of those pieces sooner and still get the near-term work done. I love the items that are in the near-term list on this, and the timeline looks very sensible. I mean, obviously, it would be ideal for this to be fixed already, but, you know, there are logistics that can't be overcome. But I'm very pleased, thank you very much, with the layout of this. I just wonder what we could do to accommodate the higher prioritized areas of the project recommendations.
Certainly, and I might ask Maria Sabata to join us just to talk maybe a little bit more about funding options, if she could. But I think the idea, you know, as I mentioned in the presentation, is that we could potentially bond almost immediately to generate additional funds if there were other projects, particularly Oxford, if we wanted to move ahead with that sooner rather than later.
Okay, thank you. I think as we've discussed, as we've talked about the budget, the current funds within the enterprise do not incorporate a capital reserve, so there aren't funds, quite frankly. So as Maria mentioned earlier, what it would be required is perhaps in the short term, there could be a loan that is given from the general fund to the enterprise funds. However, that comes with an interest rate associated with it. And we have pointed out that you can, or we can as a city bond, do a revenue bond that is associated with a fee increase at any time that does not require a vote of the people, as Maria mentioned earlier. So those are our options at this point.
Great.
Excellent, thank you.
Great. I think Member Sierra is next, and then Mayor Pro Tem. Yep. No, you were next, and then.
So, want to get back to the Oxford pipe and how, obviously, we're going to clean out the pipe, but we're also going to assess the pipe. What exactly do we mean by? I'm not sure why I'm looking at you, Director Sabata. So, but in terms of just assessing the pipe, we know that they're already, they're undersized for what we're expecting. All the work upstream is predicated on us first starting on the S1 pipe. So are we looking to potentially, when we're assessing, is this like a short-term plan before, doing the bigger project?
Yeah, I think specifically to your earlier point, the section that's about a 25-year storm event now, or is capable, I think the intent of the Phase 2 assessment would be to determine, can we line that or do something else without having to dig it up and make it structurally sound? Would you agree with that?
Right, that's to try to get it back up to at least what the capacity it was designed for.
So perhaps we might not have to replace that section if we can do there's spray-on injections that you can do from the inside. So the Phase 2 assessment would essentially assess the structural capacity of that section and determine if it's structurally sound or if we would have to just simply replace it.
And what we know today is that the pipe is actually either a 5-year or less than a 5-year pipe in certain sections of the Oxford pipe.
Correct.
So I want to make it clear that, to me, I think that does take high priority, and that's something obviously that we need to discuss at the end of the meeting, but to me, I don't want to wait any further. I don't think that there's any more assessing that we have to do. I do want us to look at just moving forward with the Oxford pipe to begin with, and obviously we could talk about other aspects of it, but finding the funding and whatever we need to do in order to start that work ASAP.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
And my concern is that area also, because we know that there have been sinkholes there before, and some of the material that I read in the Oxford pipe assessment was, we don't know the damage to the invert and how much of the dirt underneath has been washed away. And so I guess with that in mind, and maybe these two things are tied together, the assessment of the pipe and the soil around it, is that part of the reason that we asked for more money for the study? There was like an $18,000 addition to the study that council did not approve.
Correct. We never brought that forward to council, actually. So we've stayed within the original budget. I think the intent was for that change order would have been to do more detailed hydraulic modeling, not anything related to the Oxford pipe.
So, okay, not necessarily related to that end of the, my concern is because of all the sinkholes that have been down there, the damage could be even worse than we suspect. So I think that is a priority for this council.
Thank you. I'm going to weigh in as well. I think on June 10th, we had at least a good consensus here, at least 4 to 5 of us saying we wanted to move forward on the Oxford, which you brought forward very clearly. I would like to do whatever we can starting tomorrow. Waste no time. Just do everything we need to do. We need to figure out the money on it, and we have to do it. It's the priority that allows for the rest then to actually be more meaningful in the long run. It's just almost a no-brainer to me. So that's my perspective. I think
Point of information to what you
yes.
just mentioned.
Sure.
So then, can we not pull up the timeline and show, because it's slated, the Oxford is there under Q3, which is July, August, September, so
Right.
that's now.
Right.
I mean, I
It would be
think-
starting
so we
right
are-
now.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
Member Martinez is next.
Thank you. I concur, this is the #1 priority. We keep having trouble with this, and we need to do something like right now. Maybe this is a crazy question, but is it possible, or would it make any sense to even reroute where that is so that it's in not such a high trafficked area that impacts so many people?
Yeah, we actually been looking at that. Unfortunately, I think why there's such a concentration of utilities as well in Oxford is that to the north you have the golf course running north and south, so nothing's going to bifurcate that. And then to the south, there's a lot of large industrial parcels. So There is an east-west road, I think it's Radcliffe, that runs through a portion of that. We can certainly look at that as an alternative. I think even the jacking of the pipe underneath the railroad and the US 85, there's so much congestion underground at the intersection. It would behoove us to look probably a little bit further south to see if there's more room to do something like that.
Member Barentine.
I have two questions really quick. Your financing, from the 1999 study, there was obviously some work done, and I'd like to make sure that we have a little bit more information on exactly what was done. $1.6 million approximately was borrowed, and the reason that we don't have money in the capital improvement, although each year $100,000 has been budgeted since 2001 to go ahead and do capital improvements, it just never gets done. There was another $300,000 that was spent, I believe, in 2009, at least from the budget portion of it, and then there's a different accounting section underneath it. We'll say like $3,000 or something, but I'm talking about the initial one for the stormwater drainage fund piece of it. So more than half of the money that we collect goes to pay off a debt from 2001, and so we don't have money like what I looked at Littleton's budget and what they do, and they've got $300,000 or $400,000, and every year they actually spend it for some capital upgrades. Doing Stern Parkway, they're working with the Urban Drainage Fund, getting federal dollars back in here because they're identifying projects through the years, and they've got a 10-year plan to go ahead and divert it actually around homes so that they don't have to go ahead and do the purchasing piece of it. And then we also have Arapahoe County's example on how they've done some of their stuff. I'd like to know, get a little bit more information on how we're working with urban drainage so that we can access any of the federal funding that may be available to us, and what our 5-year plan is with them. I probably don't have that right now, but if we could get a little bit better grasp on the budget and what's been spent on that money, I think that $1.6 million isn't even slated to be paid off until 2023 or something. I mean, so all of this time, all of the money that's being collected has been kind of piddling around with trying to pay that back, and it hasn't, and it was refinanced in 2012. So this council has to have a little bit better understanding of where the money that's being collected, that $300,000-400,000 a year, and what it's been spent over for the last couple of decades as well. And then you mentioned the pipe for Oxford, and that there's a much larger pipe, and then you've got smaller pipes going into that larger pipe. It's causing some but if we go ahead and redo that section, are we going to do it all to the larger pipe portion of it? And
Excuse me, yes, I think that's Councilmember Sierra's point, is that if we've got this kind of bigger piece in the middle with smaller pieces on either end, that the whole thing should be sized to accommodate the 25-year storm.
And who put that larger portion in? How did that get put in?
I'm not certain.
Do we know what CDOT put in underneath the road when they redid Santa Fe? Was that a larger?
That's the smaller 72 inches.
That's the smaller.
Underneath the intersection, yeah.
To Councilmember Sierra's point, and maybe physics, then if we don't do this all the way to the plat, all we're going to do is keep creating weaker bottleneck portions. So we have reinforced the portion on the east side. We have now, because they had a failure in that parking lot for the apartment, we have now reinforced 3 sections on the west side, and it keeps failing past that point because it's stronger, it's better pipe, and it just keeps failing. So when will we have some information on exactly what it would be to do it to the larger pipe? Because that's not what's in the original study portion to do that. So if we're going to avoid having those continual bottlenecks and just actually creating weak points that just become the next sinkhole, how long will it take for us to get a reasonable approximation of what it's going to cost to do it for the entire line, which is what would be necessary unless we're going to just keep creating problems? What's the timeline for that?
Certainly. So the direction that was in the Calibre study was to create high-level estimates so the pipe for the 25-year design, all the way replacing from Navajo, which is on the east side of 85, the intersection with Windermere, all the way to the river is $19.6
So that's
million.
already in the budget that we got today.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you.
But to go to your point, how do we get to a more refined number? We would actually have to start the design process, which based from the discussion tonight is the direction I would take away as we get underway with design and put an initial milestone of preliminary design with a more robust cost estimate that's based on the actual conditions, looking at alternative routes potentially, that sort of thing.
When this last flood happened, when that sinkhole happened, I believe from walking that area and talking to some people that it's a possibility that it's actually what backed it up into the Rotolo Park and breached the dam because of the suction, whatever was creating that. What I was talking about is that entire line.
Oh, excuse me.
Because just at Navajo, all we've done now is potentially create a weak point, a bottleneck in a residential area now, and potentially creating flooding where we're trying to kind of eliminate it. I would like a little bit more information on exactly how that pipe's failure played into the flooding that happened in the area that we saw along Acoma, Bannock, and Rotolo Park, and the sinkhole that was created for Jason Park, because I think that we're just continually putting that back up. I'm not interested in necessarily pushing it back up into the residential area. Now, I'm not an engineer, so I'm going on the information of walking that area, seeing the problem, understanding from talking to the neighbors that we've got a problem going all the way down that line, and that I believe that when that sinkhole happened, it is what contributed to the flooding over there. So if you could at least take that concern and we could get a little bit more information, because if we fix it at Navajo and all we're doing is pushing it back up into the neighborhood, that's not what I want to do.
Yeah, and I
It's
think,
not appropriate.
excuse me, yeah, I think the idea, I don't think it would cause problems back up into the residential area if we replaced from Navajo to the river, because like if you use like a bathtub drain, if you're making the drain larger to get the water out, it's not going to cause more backup. It's actually going to help the water to get out faster. So that's the concept, is why we want to do the most downstream pipe, is that it gets the water out faster to the river. And therefore it should make improvements up and not negatively impact upstream areas.
Member Barentine, there are several people that have questions, and you've had about 7-8 minutes here, so I'm going to move us along.
I need to clarify the question. If we make the pipe bigger at that area, I'm still concerned that we're bottlenecking it because it's
Yes, we
still
heard
smaller.
that. We heard that.
We're
I'm going to
still
move on
smaller
to
into
Member
that.
Cuesta.
So if you could put that into your, so if you understand what I'm asking, then I have some level of
I
comfort
think
with
they
it.
do. I think it's, thank you. Yes, Member Cuesta.
Could I have you go down to the slide? I think it's 4 down. It's the cost summary table.
I think this was it.
Well, it was.
Oh,
it's
I'm
titled
sorry, it
cost
was in the
summary table.
supplemental. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Very good. And so I think this ties in with the discussion we're currently having. So I believe that there was a collective agreement at the last meeting that we had with Calibre that the Oxford really is everybody's strongest concern right here and right now. Would S2 alone fix that? It doesn't appear so. We would need S2 and S1, correct? Because again, as we're discussing, we're just bottlenecking and doing it piecemeal and pushing the problem further down unless we do it uniform 10-year capacity or 25-year capacity, correct?
I'll let Mr. Murphy speak to that, but to my earlier point to Ms. Barentine, it helps definitely, but S2 will help even more.
Yeah, so S1 takes the pressure off of the upstream system right now because that's such a bottleneck. It's just creating pressure, and you can see. I actually drove by the sinkhole that was created, and water was coming out of the ground, probably that high, just shooting out of that sinkhole. So there's a lot of pressure, and this would relieve that pressure. So it really helps that S2 section a little bit, but to your point, Council Barentine, is that S2 section is also a concern because we don't know what's happening under that pipe and where there might be sinkholes developing there. So
sinkhole, did you see the water coming out of, the one at Jason or the one at Oxford?
At Oxford, yeah.
Member Questa, continue.
You bet, thank you. So in that, we might pull in Director Sabat at this point. If we do 25 years, let's say, in the no detention option, and I know these are ballparks, but we're looking at 39 million. With detention, we're looking at 39 again. We can bond that much right now? Even if we had the desire to, could this council come up with $39 million if we went to the bond and increased the fees?
Yes.
Yeah,
Sorry,
thank you.
I'll turn on. Yes, I mean, we have not formulated all of the numbers and what the fee impact would be. Of course, it's dependent upon the interest rate that we would be able to bond at, right? And what the level that the city council would want to suggest, but we would be able to bond to that rate, yes.
And this is something that's come up prior, and it is going straight to the fee increase, which it does kind of circumvent the voice of the people. However, there's a tremendous urgency now, and I think there's a great anxiousness within the community to get this resolved. There really is no way to bond now and to put this on a ballot later, because if the citizens were to say no, we've already taken out the bond.
There isn't a requirement for a revenue bond to go to a vote of the people.
Sure.
So that we would bring that forth in a city council regular meeting that would be voted upon.
When do you think that fee study would be available? And I believe that it's somewhat charted out here, but if we just wanted the piecemeal version of S1, S2, do you know when we could get an estimate of what sort of fee increases the citizens would receive to pursue one of these two options here?
So I'm not certain it's necessarily dependent upon, because it's a monetary value that we would be bonding. We've done some preliminary estimates at an annual rate of 4%, but at a lower amount than that rate. We did it for 15 million and 20 million because the thought was that might be something we discussed tonight relative to, doing smaller bonding and moving forward. And part of the reason that we're talking about that is because there is a requirement to spend the money within a 3-year period. And because of the unknowns that Maria mentioned earlier regarding work with CDOT and also with the railroad, et cetera, it might behoove us to do it in pieces versus bonding for the entire amount. And again, with an assumption of a 4% interest rate, the residential increase would be approximately $7 to $8 a month.
$78 a month per month, excuse me, $78 a month per household. Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
And unfortunately, these projects are expensive. They aren't free. Yeah.
And that was for 15 to 20 million would land us at that increase that you just discussed.
And again, that's an estimate based on an interest rate of 4%.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I believe maybe Mayor Pro Tem was next.
I do have a question on that also. The $7 or $8, is that every house, whether they're large houses or small houses, or is it based on size or on the residence?
I believe it's per residential unit. If it's like a commercial property, then it's based on your square footage.
Okay, but residential property, it's just based on residential.
It's a fee.
I believe it's
Similar
per
to
lot.
how it's assessed now.
Regardless of the lot size, I believe.
Oh, per lot. So most houses are built on 2 lots or maybe more. Is that?
We'll have to clarify, but I believe the rate was the same for each residential unit.
Okay, and I do have some concerns because I think there is a vulnerable population in this city that is already maxed out to the amount of money that they can pay because they're living on fixed incomes. They're deciding, do I buy groceries or do I buy medicine? And so I think we need to be cognizant of that. I also, I really would like us as a city to tighten our belt also and to figure out where we can get money from to help pay for this, whether it's through urban drainage and flood control but I also think that if we're expecting citizens to come up with money, I think they can expect of us that we need to be very diligent with the tax dollars that they are giving us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Member Sierra or Martinez? Member Wink.
Thank you, Mayor. Be very quick. So to our existing discussion, I just want to make sure what I asked earlier regarding and what you responded to in terms of the loan from the general fund and then this to the enterprise fund. Can I make it a formal council request that we get a little bit of more information about that? This potential loan, or is what you've said what you have to say?
Regarding what the amount would be, or
just
could be, and what the interest rate would be, those sorts
Yes,
of
thank you, Maria. Just
confirmations.
the details, sometime soon,
Okay.
please.
And if I could clarify too, the number that I just proposed as far as a rate was also assuming a 20-year. I mean, that would be another variable that we would have to consider
The
as well.
$7 to $8 a
Yeah.
month?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's another variable in
Based
the
on a
calculation.
20-year rather than a 30 or a 15.
15-year.
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to formally request that information in
Sure.
case you hadn't noted it as such.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Member Sierra.
So I didn't see this option online, but in terms of the interactive and member requested brought up an aspect of it that I'm trying to figure out is that, it sounds like we're leaning towards an Oxford pipe of 25-year. But then earlier, I believe it stated that most cities, when they're retrofitting, are doing 10-year. So if we were to do a 25 on the Oxford pipe and do a 10-year for the rest of the segments, what does that look like? What type of, are you able to build out an interactive or just basically stating within a 5-year, rainfall event or a 10-year, 25-year, what the flooding possibilities are for each neighborhood? Is that something that can be done?
Yeah, we could do that. Just take the proposed storm drain system, whatever it is, a 10-year or 25, and we actually have plotted flood limits on those, so we have those available that we could show you.
But that's not available today, correct?
It's not available. in
Okay,
study
thank you.
today, yeah.
Member Martinez.
Thank you. My question relates to floodproofing. Should I hold that until we are ready to talk about that?
How about
Or-
if we finish up this one? Member Quest, your light's on, but I'm not sure if it was, okay. So I think, yes, let's have you be next, but let's do this. Are we ready to move forward on Oxford? And at a 25-foot, or 25-year foot? How big is it?
25
It's a
year
70.
event. 25.
Yeah, it's, sections would be 12-foot wide by 7 foot high, so 24 feet by 7 feet high.
Are we ready to move forward on this? Anybody disagree with that as a next step, that we want to move on that quickly? Getting all the information, what the loan amount would be, how the loan could be used to offset something else, but we know it can't be transferred into that, but how we could use the bonding based on the rates? Yep, okay, so now we have some lights on. Mayor Pro Tem? Okay, Member Berentine, sorry. Yeah, put them
We have
all
a
back
limit.
on.
When was the last increase that we had? What are we currently at now, and when was the last increase that we had?
I have the quarterly rates in front of me. It was increased, I believe, this past January, yes. It's $13.16 per quarter per residence, and commercial is 1.1 cents per square footage.
In the 2019 budget, I thought it said 16. It's 16, and that when was the last increase prior to that?
That I don't know. I
I'm
don't know
not sure
to be
that that's
exact.
accurate. That's what it says in the budget, but I'm not sure that that's accurate.
What are you referring to?
To the storm,
16?
to the 2019, 2018.
Are you saying
that section.
$16 per quarter? Is that what you're
Right.
saying? In
Well,
the budget book?
Yeah, I thought that it got raised something from like $6 or something. It says from 2001 to 6. Since there seems to be some concern about that, if we could get the previous rates and what it is now so that it matches what that?
I certainly will. I
Okay.
don't know that there's a concern from my perspective because my budget manager provided this information to me this afternoon, that the residential rate is currently $13.16 per quarter. So
I
I'll look.
can get you the page number.
appreciate
for
that.
what-
Thank
For
you.
what I'm reading from online, because I went back, I think it goes back to 2013 is the farthest I can go back. And it does state in the verbiage there that the previous rate was increased in 2001, but I'm not so sure about that. And then there was some priority-based budgeting stuff going on where a couple of $100,000 was taken out of there, and then that was changed for 2019. So if we could get the budget and what's being spent and how that money's being collected and spent. I know it's not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but we have to have that.
I think what we need to know
I
right
can't
now is.
explain why it
Yeah.
says what it says, I just know it says it, so
All
I
right,
can't
so
explain it.
some discrepancy in her mind, perhaps just relieve her mind with whatever information you have. I also want to ask Member Barentine, does that mean that you're ready to move forward on this, or you're waiting for that information in order to move forward? No, I'm asking you a question. I'm going to ask everyone to go around. We're going to start with you. Are you ready to move forward on the Oxford? I'm asking you now. Oh, my goodness. Member Sierra.
So did you want me to just
Yeah,
answer the question?
answer the question,
Okay, yes, I'm
right.
ready to move forward with the 25.
Okay. Member Martinez.
I'm ready to move forward.
All right, Member Wink.
I'm ready.
Member Cuesta. And if you have a question, that's fine.
I do, yes, certainly. Can we go back to the cost summary table? When we say we're moving forward with Oxford, I just want to make sure I have an exact understanding. Are we talking about an S1 or S2 project when we say are we talking about both? When we say we're moving forward now, I just want to know exactly what we're talking about.
Certainly. I believe the question on the table is just for S1.
Just for S1, okay. At a 25-year capacity, we're talking with or without detention?
Correct. So we'd have to investigate further, do we do the detention at this time? Can we get by without detention? Obviously, it makes a difference there in the cost difference. So we need to do a little bit more analysis. If we're leaning towards the 25, does it make sense to do the detention at this time?
Okay. I do, my concern, and I certainly don't want to rehash the whole conversation now, is that we are just pushing the bottleneck back, correct? We make that 25 and everything's still at 10 to the point where Oxford and Rotolo start. Is that correct? We would do, am I understanding that correctly?
No, again, I think it would provide some, S1 definitely provides relief to the areas upstream. Not to the effect that doing S2 would, obviously, but at least it doesn't make it any worse. It does not back up. Can you reiterate that, Greg?
I would ask you, can we explore both? Can we bring both options back, maybe individually or collectively to do them both?
I'm fine with that.
Thank you. And then, yes, I would support that.
Okay.
And I would like to say, I understand that these fees are very tough to swallow, and that's a consideration that we're all going to have to take into account and figure out how we want to move forward on that, because I know that's it's burdensome for many folks in the community. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem. Yes. Do you want to move forward on this as suggested by Mr. Cuesta?
I actually would like more information. I do think this is imperative that we do this, but I would love to have that information, the information that we've asked for about the rates and S1 and S2, and separate them out also, if we did one and not the other, and then if we did both.
So you actually are for us moving ahead on S1 and S2 and getting all the information starting as soon as we can? Or are you wanting to get all this other information and then come back and decide again to move forward with S1 or S2 or both?
Actually, I'm okay with moving forward, but I want to know what the impact is going to be to the citizens.
Sure, that's what all this will do.
So moving forward is just going to get us to the point where we'll look at the numbers, right?
Absolutely. We don't do
Okay.
anything without going into a regular meeting
Well,
and
right.
making that decision. So let's get going on this. Let's get all the information. We probably want to move forward on an S1 or an S2 or maybe both together. But we need all the information and it has to come pretty soon. I'll weigh in saying yes as well. I would also like to explore the possibility, I don't know if it could be out of the 3 million that we're talking about that isn't supposed to be transferred. Could there be a special fund for those who meet a certain income threshold that are going to have difficulty with the change, even if it's a graded time kind of lapse thing of, first year, so that we can give some ease to those who are on very difficult incomes, because last thing we want to do is create another crisis with people's homes and their ability to stay put and live well and thrive. Member Barentine.
I appreciate the question that Councilmember Cuesta asked, and I thought we were doing both S1 and S2. If, to the Public Works Director's comment, I'm not interested in keeping this the same or not making it worse. I'm interested, if we're going to spend this money, we fix it. And if the only way we actually fix it is to do both S1 and S2, then that's exactly what we should do. I mean, I don't want to go into this thinking that we're leaving it equal to what it is now or not making it worse. We're actually supposed to be spending this money to fix it. And so if the only way we can fix it is to do a combination of those two, then that's the only way that I would be and approve of it. So.
Thank you. Member CR, did you want to weigh in on any more since we started with you?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing, that we actually did raise a council request back in November for the fee increase, and it did state that we last raised it prior to this year in 2001, and I actually do have a copy of it with me. Just one copy if you want to see it, but November 2018 is when we raised it, or when we raised the council request.
Member Martinez, you're okay with combining the two? But separating them out so we know what leg one, leg two. All right.
Could I ask a
yes.
question in terms of process, and to bring this information back in terms of options, like a quadrant, including the financing options and what that would cost to a study session, correct?
I would like it to come to a regular meeting.
Thank you.
And I think I'd like to see us vote. I think it's time to do that, and we can have a discussion on the dais about it, but I think we need to
So
move
would that
forward.
mean our best recommendation to come to you? I mean, I'm not quite sure how that would work if there were options.
So here's my thing with S1. There is no way we cannot do that. We just cannot not do S1. We cannot not do Oxford from Santa Fe over at least. That is our riskiest piece for everyone, and it does relieve you. I mean, it's physics, it's water physics, small goes into bigger and then it lets things out. So we can't not do that. So I would say bring at least that forward so we can make a decision one night. But if you don't want to do that, I'm going to be very upset if we don't, because we have put people
Staff is happy to do whatever you want. We just can't bring a resolution for 4 different options. Is
Right,
kind of what I'm saying.
so it would have to start with the S1 is what you're saying, or the Santa Fe. So the Oxford thing is one piece. Maybe another piece is what's beyond that. Another piece is beyond that. So maybe we'd vote separately on each one. I don't know what you think would be the best way to bring it forward.
I think to, laying out, here's kind of next steps for S1, here's the cost associated with that. Here's the steps if we did S2 and S1, here's the cost associated with that. And really it's 2 options for council to consider. And our recommendation would be is we enter into a contract for design and we begin the process for analyzing the rates and going out for a bond issue. That would be the action item that we would request.
And do you think that's doable in coming back to us to
Yes.
regular session? Mayor Pro Tem's next, and then Martinez.
And perhaps this is what Interim City Manager Hargrove is talking about. We're not talking about option A at this point. We're just talking about the Oxford piece of it. Was that what you were?
Well, yes, I wasn't sure if you wanted, the 10-year, the 25-year S1 plus S2, but I think Maria DeAndrea's approach will be very useful, but not all the rest of the activities in option 1A that we presented tonight.
Okay, Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought everybody was saying, let's move on to Oxford as one piece of that option. Member Martinez and then
Thank
Member
you. I
Sierra.
prefer to do, not even look at it in pieces, just do S1 and S2 together and 25-year capacity. The only thing that I'm still working on deciding is detention or no detention. I think 25 years is definitely the way to go, and both parts, S1 and S2. I don't want to look at it as two separate things. I don't think that makes sense. I don't think it makes sense to do only one. So I would prefer not to even kind of go down that rabbit hole of options.
Okay, Member Sierra?
I guess I have a question about how quickly we would see all this information come back to us, because I did ask a question of Mr. Murphy. Yes, Mr. Murphy. About just seeing what that means if we were to do a 25-year pipe versus, I guess now we're talking about S2. If we were to do a 25-year there or a 10-year, what does that look like? Would we be able to see that information prior to it coming to vote? Is that something that we could quickly see? Yes. Thank you. And I think we do need to talk about detention, so the next
I think
page.
the answer there was yes, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right, Member Cuesta. That's right. If you're wanting to re-summarize what we're doing here, you're the one. We're talking about S1 and S2 together now as a package and not, I mean, Mayor Pro Tem, you had suggested that they be separated. Are you still wanting them separated, or? I mean, I was hoping tonight we'd at least get S1, but if you're willing to do S1 and S2 tonight, I'd be all on board for that as well. Member Wink.
I'm on board with S1 and S2 as well. I mean, the benefit is pretty clear versus the cost, so.
Member Cuesta.
I'm thrilled about getting S1 and S2 done. It is the consideration of the increased fees
Right.
upon our citizens. So that's the consideration I'll have. I'm hoping we can reach a conclusion on the dais. Our worst case scenario is we don't pass it, send it back, make whatever tweaks are needed, bring it back the next time.
Or the option would be to pull 2 out and just start S1 and then
Sure.
move on. Who knows?
Sure. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, you okay to move forward with that? Member Barentine? S1, S2, all one.
I already made that pretty clear in my initial thing, yes. I haven't changed my mind.
All right, Member Sierra.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we're ready to move forward on that. You got clear direction?
Oh, I do, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Is there anything else on this? We've got 15 minutes left to talk some more if you want to go further into some of the other parts of the options. Member Martinez.
I would like to talk about the floodproofing. It's really important to do that, and a lot of our citizens have already done quite a bit of floodproofing, which has helped them. I would prefer to see the reimbursement option of 70% for, what's been brought up tonight. A lot of our residents are on fixed income, and these improvements could be pretty expensive. So I would prefer the 70%. And then can you tell me how we would kind of go about this? Would it be up to the homeowners to decide which improvement options to make, or would they work directly with the city to say, hey, what do you recommend for my property personally? Because I feel like it's a lot of options to somebody who doesn't really know what's best without making it worse for like their next door neighbors.
Yeah, we, as part of the study, there was a flow chart created with a lot of resources that residents can use to kind of get educated about the options, but staff is certainly available to talk with them. If there is things like regrading of the property or doing things, because what you can't do by state law is divert water from your property onto somebody else's. So when you get into regrading of your property, then we would recommend that an engineer be hired, that not from the city, but that an independent engineer be hired to assess that condition and help them through that process. So it's kind of a scale effort depending on how much they need to do.
Member Barentine.
The issue came up last time and has been raised since that several of the homes that had some significant damage weren't even included in your map. There was an open records request on, and some of the information that was provided shortly afterwards has the homes probably more than double what you have in the study. Is there some way that we could get some inclusion for those people that did have damage? We several council members saw it in some of those homes, and they weren't included in this information or in the map. I have from the open records request the homes that were listed shortly afterwards, and maybe we could include those so that we can have some kind of, I mean, it upsets the public if we have this kind of study and they had some significant flooding that they reported and they don't see themselves included in that. So is there a way we can kind of?
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of including any reported flooding, that, well, we do have some of that, and it's clearly in areas outside of the floodplains or the flooding and inundation areas that we.
So the information that was collected by the city, has it more than double what we've got in there? Because I think you've got it at about 25. So I'd be more than happy to present, give you this information, and maybe I think you've taken into account some of the citizens who have come forward and said, how come my home isn't there? And a lot of that was the issue about Bannock being on there, but there actually were a lot more homes in there. So I'll be happy to provide you this information. And this comes from it's from the city, from that open records request. So is there a way that you're going to redo any of that information so that we can have a little bit more?
Well, I'd like to talk to Maria about that, but there are a couple of things I would like to do. That's one of them.
Okay.
The other one I'd like to do is, because of the fact that this analysis is more of a macro and it doesn't really focus on any individual lots, what I'd like to do is look at the homes that are in the immediate vicinity of ones that we had identified, okay, and look at those a little bit closer individually and just see whether there are some other ones that need to be added in.
So there were two issues, the inclusion of homes that weren't included and the amount of damage and the level of water. And that goes to what Councilmember Martinez was bringing up. It's just my concern that if they aren't included in that piece of it, whether they would be included to go ahead and qualify for any of the flood proofing and any monetary benefits that they might get from that, depending on what criteria we use for it. And so I'll be happy to present that information to you.
I have a copy of it too, and I think actually we were all sent it, so you should have it on file. Mayor Pro Tem.
One of the concerns that I have about floodproofing and doing certain things to your home, we need to make certain that it doesn't violate our Muni code either, because I know that some of the recommendations are to build a wall or whatever around your house. We have people in areas of this city who have gone to municipal court because they want their wall torn down. And because this is a flood-prone area, I think we're going to, I think it's going to be very dangerous to flood-prone or flood-proof your house, and the house next door is going to be impacted.
I would agree with that. And so I think we would encourage people to work with their neighbors to come up with a solution, because again, we just don't, when we can, have them push their problem off onto their neighbor.
But even if, let's say, 4 neighbors get together and do something, and then all of a sudden the people outside of them are starting to have a problem because those 4 neighbors did something, I think it's a slippery slope.
And I think, so I think one of the elements, if we move forward with the floodproofing, we'd bring back a more detailed, what does that program look like? How would they have to submit information to the city before they move forward with work? Especially for situations like that where, again, they're grading on their property. For replacing putting in an egress window, probably not a lot of effort, but we'd still look at that before they went forward with it. So that's what we would bring back.
And can I just make one comment
Sure.
right quick? Egress windows are really for fire, and to be able for the fire department to get in and you to get out. One of the ladies that lives on Bannock had egress windows when the flood hit, and it blew the windows out. I mean, the window didn't break, it blew the whole window out. And I think another thing that we have to be careful in a flash flood, like those houses over on Acoma, the water hits all sides of their house at the same time, and if the windows get pushed in, there's nothing they can do.
Were you going to speak? to that?
Yeah, the point about egress windows, I think with any flood proofing that they want to undertake as a homeowner, very important to understand what other things might happen. And egress windows are probably applicable for very low flooding against the house, but when in those areas where we've got 2 feet of, it's absolutely not appropriate. And I did see some areas where people had done some work around window wells that was not adequate. And so I think that it's a process. This idea of flood proofing is look through the report, look at the conditions of your house, talk to the city, talk to a registered engineer, and then make an informed decision about what makes sense in your house. And one of the reasons that I like the egress windows, because there are a lot of homes in this area that have bedrooms downstairs where there are no egress windows, and so there is there's a secondary gain to that one.
Can I just follow up with that, Member Sierra? I have heard people say egress windows are only for fire, but that is not true. It's used for escape for any reason, right?
Right. It generally fire is where they originally the original intent, but any way of getting escape out of there is
If you're trying to get out of a space in the basement that's flooding, it's your only way out is a bigger window than one that you can't get into. It's just, yeah.
Right.
Member Sierra,
My question is around detention. So
go ahead. So are we done with, I want to hear from everybody on flood proofing. Can we finish that one up? Are we ready to have them bring some things back on that? Member Martinez suggested we go with the higher amount for that.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I would like to see the 70% reimbursement.
Okay. Others want to weigh in on that? Member Wink?
I concur with what Member Martinez said, and I would like to see that same information as well. I think it's reasonably requested.
Okay, Member Cuesta?
I guess one quick follow-up question on the difference between the 70% reimbursement and 50% reimbursement. As I look at option A in the slides, the estimated cost total is $50.9 million. The estimated cost for option B is 52.2. The only reason I bring that up is the only difference I see is the 50% reimbursement versus 70% reimbursement. Can I take away then that the difference in cost between 50 and 70% on this reimbursement program would be 2.3 million-ish? Thank you.
That's exactly right.
Okay, thank you. Is the question
Yeah.
50 or 70 here?
I mean,
50, or excuse me, 70. Excuse me, thank
yeah.
you.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem, you want to see us bring back a little bit more detail about 70%?
I pass right now.
Okay, Member Barentine.
I would like to have some criteria for what homes we're going to include. We also had some suggestion at a table, and I believe Councilmember Cuesta was there. You were talking to some people at the community meeting about putting their house on a stilt. So I think that we need to make sure that we understand exactly the level that we're going to support. I'm not sure that I'm for putting houses on stilts. There might be some people that want to take that option, but it was garnered and it was a serious suggestion, along with a lot of other things that we saw, and including the concern of what it does to somebody else's home as well. So I'd like to, whether it's 50 or 70, I want to see how the process and procedure we're doing to identify which homes qualify for this, put it to the expanded list so that everybody's comfortable that they're included with it, but not just including every egress window or person who decides that they want to have a dock house. So those can get pretty spendy. So if we could have a little bit of criteria around it, I think that would make it a little bit more palatable.
Member Sierra, and then we'll start with you on the next one.
I do want to see a little bit more information on it, but I'm fine moving forward with it. And also, just the difference is 1.3 million.
Yeah.
I know Member Cuesta said 2.3, but just as a correction.
Thank you. Our mathematician. Yeah, I was surprised at the smallness of the difference between the two, which is what leads me to think 70% is really a little smarter. But I think having some criteria, I think we'll all want to know what the criteria is that you would suggest for that. And we're not going to have people do things just for the, most people aren't going to want to put in even the 30% for something that's frivolous. So we're talking about people who are going to be responsible, I'm sure, but some criteria that we would have. Could I ask, if we do that, I mean, and we have the 70%, the accountability from one home that does it versus another, would there be requirements with that, right? You cannot have one improve in order and then make it worse for the person next to you. That would seem like, obviously the engineering would take that into account and make sure that what any one property does not make it worse for another property.
That's exactly right. So we would write not only the criteria for how you would go about this, but the process as well. So again, they would need to hire an engineer if they're doing regrading, and make sure and verify before any work occurred, because they would need then to take out a permit, that they would get concurrence from the city before being able to move forward.
Right.
So we'll bring those elements back of how that would look like when we talk more about this.
Great, thank you. Member Wink?
I know we're over time. How soon can will we be looking at this
Timeline?
on the dais?
For the flood proofing, I don't think that would take too long. You know, I would say within the next month or so. Next week. I will try my hardest.
All right, Member Sierra wants to kick us off on the next topic here, and we'll 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll take a break.
So just regarding the detention, so when I was reading the report, it didn't seem that the detention was going to make much of a difference. And I think the report stated Jason in particular, Jason Park, just because it was out of the way of the actual drainage system. So I guess a little bit more clarity on what that means. Are we talking about just a specific area? Are we talking about Englewood as a whole? It seems like we're being advised not to go down that route. And then the second question is about Rotolo Park visit. Rotolo Park is mentioned in the report. Does the detention, is that also taken into account just, improving the detention of Rotolo Park during these type of events?
Yes, we looked at a number of different options for detention, and because of the size of the tributary areas that are coming down to these detention ponds and the quantity of flow, you really need a very large area to be impactful. What you're trying to do with a detention pond is store enough water that the downstream system, you can decrease the size of the downstream system, and we weren't seeing a lot of benefit there. So you're doing a lot of improvements to parks that change their configuration, but you're not getting a lot of benefit on the downstream end. I think before we dismissed detention altogether, we'd want to do some little studies of those areas a little bit more detail, to see if we could get some more volume that would be more impactful. But I doubt it. I doubt if that's going to help.
A follow-up and then Member Cuesta.
Okay. So then if we were to move forward with S1, S2, I didn't see any detention there that we would need to identify prior to moving forward with those two. The detentions are further down. In terms of just like
there was Rotolo Park we looked at, and then there was another one.
Jason.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's what Mr. Murphy is saying, is Jason might not be as effective, but Rotolo Park might still be. So it might be a combination still.
Yeah.
So a little bit more detail for S1 and S2.
Member Cuesta.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate Councilmember Sierra circling back on the detentions and going back to the S1, S2 project. One of the things I noticed is that on the 25-year capacity S1, no detention, it's 19 million. 25-year with detention, it's 16. That's the only project in which it's 3 million less to have the detention. Can you explain the difference there on why it costs less to have a detention in that case?
Yeah, the downstream pipe ends up being smaller.
Can you explain that further? I think why that is.
Yeah, what happens is the water, the peak flow reaches the area where the detention pond is, and water is held there and continues to gather in that location while the storm is receding, so that by the time the pond is filled up, there's less water coming into the pond, and the net result is that you have less flow, less peak flow, and which takes a smaller pipe.
Others on this one? What kind of direction do you want them to bring back on this? You want to think about it? Member Sierra?
It does sound like we need that information quickly if we're going to be voting on S1 and S2, because now we're being told that there is a possibility that if we do detention for S1, it does lower the price tag. So if we're able to get that information, yeah, I think that we do need to look at that.
So I think that'll be a part of the package that we bring back when we talk about S1 and S2, the rate, and we'll do some more refined analysis on what are the benefits. Is it worth doing detention in Rotolo Park for what cost in order to gain that smaller pipe size? So we'll bring that, a recommendation surrounding the detention back when we talk about S1 and S2.
Member Wink?
Thank you, Mayor. So it seems that there's nothing else for us to decide.
Right.
Yeah, the information will be provided in the packet.
You'll bring
so
it back then.
I think we're done here.
Great. I have one quick question, and, well, maybe it's not quick, and if it isn't, tell me, and we'll move on. So we've talked about different forms of drainage in all kinds of new properties, and I may have just misunderstood you in saying that some things really don't get very much bang for the buck, and yet when we continue to do things like new schools or new developments, new whatever it is, and parking lots and things like that, are there some measurable gains in requiring certain kinds of drainage that will add up over time but may not be that big of a deal in that one property? Like, you know, I mean, even the redevelopment at Kmart, no matter what goes in there, you know, an entire big parking lot is not the best thing for the environment. We know that.
Right. There are a lot of things that you can do as a city to improve conditions, but we have done similar studies in other areas that where we, for example, went in and said, if we're going to be expanding lots and letting people build additions on their houses and it's creating more impervious areas, what can we do, because that's going to increase runoff. And we did a study that showed that if you require things like diverting downspouts into landscaped areas rather than on driveways, that can start adding up after a while. But those things are very incremental. They're not of the magnitude that we're talking about with this, you know, the flooding problem you guys have.
That's very helpful. Thank you. All right. Council, let's take a 5-minute break and be back. Thank you for the work that you've done. I'm sure we'll see you again. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Right, if we could take our seats, I'd like to get us restarted. Right, we're moving on to agenda item 4, staff response to July 2018 flood event. Interim City Manager Dorothy Hargrove, Fire Marshal Laura Herblan, and Commander Tim Englert are here to present to discuss staff response to July 2018 flood event. Thank you for being here and for the materials you provided.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Mayor, and thank you, members of council. Your packet was slightly amended. Fire Marshal Herblan presented you with her memo with a couple of changes, and I'd like her to address that so we all make sure we have the right information. It was presented in paper tonight.
It's this document that we got all hard copies of?
Yes.
Is the correct version, not one that's on the electronic or the, okay.
It was the draft that I actually attached, so it's had some date errors. So just the change in formatting is just some dates.
Okay.
From 2018, it kept defaulting to 19, so that's what you'll see. So I apologize for the change in dates.
I just wanted to clarify that it wasn't substantive changes, but we'd rather have the correct item for the agenda, so.
Thank you. It makes it
and the
more
minutes.
sensical knowing that it.
Yes, it hasn't
Good.
happened in the future.
Very good. Thank you. Our hope here tonight is to provide the majority of the time for questions from council. Clearly, we are interested in continuing to learn from the response to the flood event almost a year ago now on July 24th, 2018. But what the focus of our discussion tonight, which I hope will be helpful, is how staff responded as part of our emergency management procedures. Clearly, Commander Englert and Fire Marshal Herblan were key players in that. I have included in the packet memos from other departments, including our community development department and the building division of that department, public works and parks, as well as a copy of a memo presented by former manager Keck at the, what was the date on that? August. Thank you. In 2018, which recapped some of the lessons learned from a staff perspective. I think a couple of the key things to keep in mind, and I appreciate Ms. Herblan's overview as well, that we need an emergency manager for the city would be a recommendation. I know that council has been considering that, and staff has brought that forward on numerous times, that the adoption and dissemination and training on an emergency operations plan would be very, very helpful. And we also need improved communication. I wanted to say very briefly that our new communications manager, Chris Hargrove, is extremely well trained in emergency communications and has taken many of the NIMS, National Incident Management, what's that stand for? Service? Systems, thank you. He is a very well-trained emergency communications manager who's already established strong relationships with the police department, Office of Public Information. So I think as a city, we are better prepared given his experience and expertise in that area. I have also asked all full-time staff in the city to take the very introductory course from NIMS, and I'm happy to report that so far 92% of all full-time employees have completed that certificate. It's online and it's free. It doesn't mean that the city, every person in the city is qualified to be an emergency manager, but I think it does mean that we will share some of the same vocabulary. What is an incident commander? What are some of the things that they might expect in the event of an emergency? And I would be more than happy to send that link for the online training to council, because I think that might be helpful as well, so that you could see that. And there's lots of training available. None of that compares to the extensive training of Fire Marshal Herblan or Mr. Englert and other people in the city. It's certainly a very basic introduction, but we are trying to improve our awareness as a city staff of what's involved. I will say that Mr. Keck directed these two individuals to undertake the lion's share of a lot of the emergency management work that happened in July, and I think they acquitted themselves admirably. There's no other word for it, and devoted a lot of time and energy and expertise to making sure that our response was as professional and compassionate and thorough as possible. They were not in charge of coordinating citywide communications. They assisted with information. They were not in charge of directing the work of the other departments, public works or parks or community development. So I think there was a certain lack of communication, but I don't want that to be seen as a fault of them. They did what they were directed to do by Manager Keck. With that, I would like to ask each of them if they have a statement or anything else to add before we go to questions from council. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments you two want to make at this point?
I think our timelines are very similar in our two memorandums that we submitted. And so we just entertain any questions you have about what our actions were.
Great. Thank you. Council, time for questions, and let's do the same thing. One question per person. We'll keep it moving. Member Barentine.
Here, and thank you for the work that you both did. In order to go ahead and move forward, there have been a plethora over the year. It's been a little difficult to get you to the table, but there's been a lot of open records requests. I have a lot of emails that substantiate it, but I want to make it very clear for the public that City Manager Keck had the two of you designated as the emergency managers prior to the flood on July of last year. Is that the truth? Did you understand that to be your position, that you were the emergency managers, the designated emergency managers?
My understanding was that I was acting in that capacity for the police department and that it was supporting the city manager in his efforts. There needed to be a point of contact, and I took that moniker on some of the city websites, although I never considered myself to be the emergency manager because I had no control over other city departments. I had control over what happened with the police department response, and I had control of the information that I fed to Mr. Keck and the information that he requested that I get for him.
And similar to Commander Englert, my title for the city was Fire Marshal, but going back to 2014, at various times, as similar to Mr. Englert, I was designated the emergency manager through Arapahoe County, going back to Chief Marsh for the fire department. So I had various times where I was designated as the emergency manager for the fire department and supervised emergency management employees.
Okay, and that's verified with the emails that the city manager sent in designating that that was the position you had as the designated emergency manager after Contos left, after the fire department left, so we have plenty of documentation for that. Given that there was an email that got sent on the 14th of April of this year after we asked for why there was no after-action report. And in that email, it said that the task force, which was assembled At no point gathered factual nor pertinent information pertaining to the qualifications, delegation of authority, or assigned roles and responsibilities of either of myself or the Englewood Fire Department, and it would go on. So, in part of this report that you provided, Fire Marshal, given that you were the designated emergency manager, you said that one of the shortfalls was that we did not conduct a timely after-action review, and I would consider doing this a year after the fact, not a timely after-action review, so I would share that with you. Why did you not provide an after-action report in a timely manner after the incident in July?
There were multiple reasons. Mr. Keck emailed Commander Englert and I and asked us to come to City Council to hear other city departments and to hear City Council's reaction to the flood. And I believe that was August or September of 2018. It was a short study session, and we never had an opportunity to provide a after-action report. That was the first step of it. And then in October, this is really awkward because I feel like there's no right answer. I don't want to be in trouble for answering frankly. After Mr. Keck left, I met with the city attorney's office, and they asked me not to provide an after-action report until a later date. So this is a later time that I'm reviewing this, and we just have not had a roundtable on that subject.
Can I have a clarification for that? Mm-hmm. Does that mean that not providing it to City Council that you had done one?
No, I just had a lot of notes, and this timeline is the only time that I've prepared a report since that time.
So you were asked by the city attorney's office not to produce one?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Member Wink.
Thank you, Mayor. Commander Englert and Marshal Herblan, yes? Thank you very much for what you do in the city. Thank you for this thorough report and for being here this evening to share information with us. I don't have a specific question, but I wanted to thank you for that good work and to say that my preferred part of the report was the lessons learned section, and I appreciate the detail coming from our experiences here that further supports the need for an emergency manager position, and included with that, of course, are all of the communication line that you mentioned, the system of emergency beyond 911. Those details would be put into place with someone in such a capacity. So I want to state again for record that I am fully in favor of that, and I appreciate your translating sections of our learnings into support for such a position within the city on a permanent basis. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if it's Member Martinez or Mayor Pro Tem. Okay, Member Martinez.
Thank you. I echo those same sentiments exactly. Thank you so much for everything that you do all the time, and especially in that event, and still continuing to talk about it. Again, I also appreciate the lessons learned, and I think it's really clear the lessons that we have been able to learn through this, and it again supports the need for an emergency manager position, which we have been talking about for over a year and a half. So I think it's just further proof that we need that position to fill in those gaps where we don't have, and it's not fair for us to just put that on anyone else. It's a designated position that we have a need for. So thank you so much for this recap and the lessons learned.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I greatly appreciate it, and I do appreciate all that you do. And I too, when I was reading through this, and under the lessons learned on B3, it says, well, actually what B says, how could we have performed better during this event, or what would we do different in the future? And so B3 says, treated this as a qualifying event that should have triggered the use of the city's emergency operations plan. So my question is, was that your responsibility to do that? Did you fail to do that, or did that piece fail at a higher level?
I think multiple things, dating back to even 2017, the IT event. The city wasn't trained on it, and dating back to 2014, not having an emergency manager. This, I've only been here since 2013. It's a bigger need the city's experienced, and, there's a lot of turnover. The emergency operation plan's been in a draft state. It's been sent up the chain many, many times, and there's just been other priorities in the city since I've been here. As you guys know, since you've been on council, you're all very busy. There's a lot of things going on, and it just hasn't been a priority. So dating back to 2017, same thing. There wasn't an educated need where they could have used the emergency operation plan with the IT event to use the incident command system. People weren't trained on it. So the flood event was the second time around where if people would have been trained on it in 2017, 2018 would have been smoother. Here we are in 2019, looking into 2020. At some point, we just need to get busy. And so no pointing fingers. It's just
Right.
at some point we need to take action. So,
Okay, and so really the bottom line is we didn't have an emergency operations plan in place. I mean,
There's a
there were-
draft,
The
yes.
draft was
Yes.
there. Okay, and I mean, we are working on putting those things together now, and so anyway, I just want to thank you for all that you do, both of you. Thank you.
Member Cuesta.
Thank you, Mayor. Fire Marshal Hembler and, Hemblin and
Herblan.
Thank you. I was going with the silent H.
Like
Thank
herbs.
you. Herblan and Commander Englert, to your initial statement where I'm not sure if I'm saying this right, and I don't think there's right or wrong. I think we're looking at what happened, and let's just figure it out from there and move forward. For me, I got out there the following day. It happened on the 24th. I didn't make it out there till the 26th. And, I was wandering around knocking on people's doors randomly. And one of the most, I'd say, strong concerns that I heard from folks is that I was the first one to knock. And that's not great when I'm the first one. And I was carrying little more than my notebook. And as I look through the timeline here, it appears as though we declared the declaration, the emergency declaration, on 7/26. Let me get back to the timeline. 7/26. And then things started to go into motion. And we're between an emergency manager now. It sounds like Arapahoe County may be lining up to help us out. And one of the things I've had some peace of mind on in the meantime is that I've been under the impression if we declare this emergency declaration right here, God forbid something bad happened, that Arapahoe County would still come in and assist us. Does that mean from the moment an emergency occurred, there would be people knocking on doors and helping out citizens? Again, that to me was one of the biggest shortcomings of the city's reaction, and I don't think that was anybody's fault. As I've outlined here, there's a few things that could have been done differently, but it was the immediate contact that I think was lacking. And is that something that we have in place now? There were folks that couldn't get water, couldn't get food, couldn't get trash bags to get all the things that were flooded out of their house. Laundry became an issue, just basic hygiene. And that I think kind of compounded what I'm just going to flat out say was some misery for some of those folks. And that to me was, I think, one of the areas that it really hurt people pretty bad. So right here, right now, would we have something in place? Would Arapahoe County help us out if we declared that emergency today? Would we have somebody knocking on doors in whatever the impacted neighborhood might be? And not be it flooding, whatever the case may be, whatever sort of disaster might strike us.
Well, I think as part of the lessons learned is that we both pride ourselves on not repeating the same mistake twice. And we would get, if it was appropriate, a disaster declaration much quicker, pushed through the city manager's office. We would get Arapahoe County in sooner, and I'll admit that our disaster estimates, the damage estimates, it was lacking because we'd never been faced with anything like that before. But I would guarantee you, if a similar situation happened in the next month, God forbid, we would certainly act upon it much differently.
And to the point of the declaration, then that all funnels through the city manager's office? The city manager makes the final call on that?
Yes.
And is there any threshold? Could you sign that at any time, really, or you're the interim manager for now, any acting manager at any time could sign that once they feel, for whatever reason they're using a declaration into place?
I would defer to the experienced emergency managers and the criteria for the state. I just can't wake up one morning and say it's a disaster.
I can speak to what the delay was. I drafted the declaration. Typically, that would be drafted by the city attorney's office, by the EOP. It designates what the jobs are for each city department. So Tim and I took on a lot of responsibilities that necessarily wouldn't fall under our purview as the co-emergency managers. So we did a lot of things just ourselves that wouldn't be delegated to other departments. So I drafted the emergency declaration and ran it through the city attorney's office, and it got hung up under which state statute I was quoting, which really, I'm the fire marshal, so that's really not my purview. So that would be something that they would draft and can have multiple declarations already drafted up, so it would go much quicker next time.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
I have a question related to that. I received it on Thursday. It had to come to me to get signed too. And that, yeah, and I got notified and had it within a half hour and had it signed and back to you all. I was at an actual conference with ULI. But did that?
Yeah, and we to his point, we don't have to wait for the declaration to start giving out water and communicating to the public. That's up to us. So we can start acting quicker. And if you look at my timeline, I called Corey Stark from the state, and he took my verbal declaration before we ever got the paper signed. So they'll take our verbal declaration ahead of time. So there's things we can do without that piece of paper. But I think by our city charter, and we have to go back and look at that, I think it has the mayor as signing the declaration. So.
Yeah. I have another question about that, but I'll keep to the one question. And Member Barentine and then Member Martinez. Member Barentine? Did you have another question? After you.
And the documentation that I was able to look at in the course of this year trying to get this meeting, I saw that there was close to $1 million spent for emergency operations plan grants that had come through, and a good portion of that was to go ahead and develop the draft plan. Then I saw numerous emails coming from both of you supporting that the administration should go ahead and put this through so that we could have the emergency plan in place. So all of that work and effort that went into that emergency plan would become part of it and do the training and start getting that piece done. What was the bottleneck? I mean, there were numerous times that you guys requested that the city manager go ahead and get this adopted. Do you understand why that didn't happen?
I personally took drafts to the city manager's office in 2015 and 2016. And it was very frustrating to see that they just stopped there. They usually stopped with the assistant city manager, who I don't know what discussions he had with the city manager, but Mr. Wolf and Mr. Robinson, that's as far as I could get them pushed. And I can't explain why.
And that's exactly what you referred to previously, that if that plan had been adopted and in place, that would have kind of diversified out a little everybody's responsibility so that they would have known what they were doing.
Right, we can't train employees on draft plans, so we have to have an adopted plan that City Council buys off on before we can train the employees and spend man-hours training staff on something that you guys buy off on. So.
And then just a matter of clarification, when Contos under that plan, when we were spending, we had quite a bit of money, and Rose Lynch was here and Contos was doing, who was Contos' supervisor during that time?
I was for a portion of that.
Thank you.
I also wanted to ask, at those two times, were you aware that what they did is brought forward to us a position for an emergency manager, and council did not push it forward? We had two times did you know that twice that they came, actually 3 times, that the manager came to us and we said no to it? I'm just curious whether you knew that.
I was involved in at least 2 study sessions with Mr. Wolf. That I don't believe has, I was never told that they were waiting for an emergency manager to adopt a revision. I know the revision was sent to Arapahoe County to review, which they did, and it was also sent to Broomfield, right? I think it was also sent to Brighton for their review, which I had no idea about. And I never got any feedback as to comments from those 2 reviews.
It's helpful, thank you. Member Martinez.
A couple of things were brought up that I was also going to touch on. It's one thing to have a draft document. It's another thing to have an actual plan with city staff trained and know what to do so that when something does happen, everyone knows what to do and we're not just winging it and doing the best that we can, which is what we did, and we did the absolute best that we could. But it's a whole nother thing to have an actual plan, practice, so everybody knows what to do when it's time. So I think, and including the communication piece of things, I think the practice, procedure, processes, you know, if we had an emergency manager, that would have been in place and we would know what to do. And all staff members would know the role, and council members would know their role as well, which is a piece that's missing that we haven't, you know, we don't have a plan for. We did talk about it at 3 different study sessions. Many of us wanted to move forward with it. The majority of council decided not to go forward with it at the time. I would love to see this council make this a priority so that we're not having the same conversation a year from now.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
I'm not going to, well, I am going to say something about that. That's not what my question is, and I will move on to my question, but the truth is, we did not have an emergency operations plan. There was a draft there that never got voted in. By law, council has to have a plan, or the city has to have an emergency plan. So that is council's fault. Why we didn't have the plan? It has nothing to do with the emergency manager. If we had a plan, then there would have been a position that needed to be filled also. And it wasn't a majority of council. 3 voted for, 3 voted against. It wasn't 4-0. So I just wanted to straighten that out. My question is about the disaster expenses. Mr. Keck told me that the city needed to experience so much disaster. Could that have included homeowners and the losses that they experienced, or did the municipality itself have to experience so much disaster before?
To hit the threshold?
Yeah, to hit the threshold.
I think the totals, we provided totals to the state for both city infrastructure and what best we knew of the residences, that the homeowners provided estimates to us of their damage. We also had to provide figures of uninsured damage, which was a problem for a lot of the city infrastructure because it was an insured loss. And so that drastically reduced the amounts that we reported to the state. In the end, Arapahoe County didn't meet their threshold and the state didn't meet their threshold.
Mm-hmm. So, I'm assuming that a lot of the homeowners in the city didn't have insurance because when they called their insurance companies, they said, oh, it's a result of flood, you're not covered. And I think one thing, I appreciated this after action report. I think that it would have been a lot more helpful to have it clear back, in August of last year. But I also think one piece that we're still missing is I think that there are a lot of homeowners that could have come and given feedback. I think there's homeowners perhaps that the city staff missed when they were knocking on doors. If people called me, and had they not called me, I wouldn't have had any idea where to go. And so I think maybe some of those people didn't call, the city for help, because it wasn't necessarily those people that were impacted the most, it was one of their neighbors that would call me. So I do think that when we have a storm of this magnitude, we really do need feedback from the public and what's going on for us to really get the picture.
If I could say, I think that's a big part of what a communications plan would involve, is not just sending out communication, but providing a site so that people can ask questions and gathering that feedback immediately and efficiently. Would you agree?
However, in that, a lot of these people were without power. I mean, they wouldn't, and besides that, they were so overwhelmed with everything they had to do, they wouldn't have, I'm not going to take time to notify the city when I'm trying to clean up, a basement full of water, so.
You finished?
And we tried to get, with code enforcement, fire marshal's office, the building inspectors, we tried to get as many people out on the streets, walking. Commander Englert and I were out on Broadway. We tried to do as much face-to-face time, trying to get every bit of social media we could, newspapers, try to reach as many people as we could, but that is one of the identified things we could have done better and lessons learned. And going forward, as Ms. Hargrove said, communications, the new communications manager will definitely help out in that area. We can always do better, and that's what these after-action reports are for.
Thank you so much.
Member Barentine.
It certainly would have helped to have gone ahead and had those reports sooner. It's very disturbing to hear that anybody discouraged this after-action report coming forward, and I have a feeling that it might have been due to some potential lawsuits that might have been coming, and I'm very disturbed by that we would have the after-action report for the IT incident several months after, and we're a year into this. The other concern is that we can't do the very best job that we can if we don't have the truth. And in order to have that, we have to have employees that have a level of comfort and empowerment to go ahead and tell the truth about what's happened. We can't get better if we're just sticking our head in the sand and pretending. That doesn't help anybody. As a matter of fact, it can be very fatal to people for us to not do that. Part of the information that came forward, aside from this revelation, that there was some discouragement on even doing the after-action report, claiming that we didn't have a plan, claiming that we didn't have anybody in charge, which I think disturbed the community a great deal, was when this came forward in April, that there was some information that employees are told not to talk to council, which in the email that was sent to us by the fire marshal here was disturbing to me. Also, in this email, that there would be any repercussions or that there would be anything that we would ever do to an employee for merely doing their job and telling us the truth. And I want to ask, aside from the conversation that the chief had with you that day, if you believe that you've suffered any retribution or repercussions for just telling the truth.
I would like to intervene here and say that any personnel question does not have to be answered for you if you do not want to answer it.
Why would that be a personnel question? Do we not
It is
encourage
a
our
personnel
employees to
issue.
tell the truth?
Yes, but if it's a personnel issue that you feel that you're at all in any way of threat, I do not want you to feel like you have to answer this tonight, okay?
Is the mayor aware of something that I am not?
No, I'm not. I'm just saying this is a personnel question about your performance, and if you feel like there's something at risk here, that's all I'm saying. Council, if you disagree with me, that's fine. I'm just giving her some space for it. Say what you want, but I just wanted to make sure you know this is not. Member Quest, were you going to say something?
I asked a question. And it's up to
Member
the
Quest,
fire.
Would the council like to weigh in this? It's up to you if you want to answer, but I wanted to make sure that what I'm saying is not out of line. Did you want to?
I guess I will. This is no longer a question about the response to the emergency. This is how you feel you're personally being treated. And I would say we're putting you on the spot. If you care to answer, please. But I would also say I'm not sure if we should be compelling somebody to necessarily say that how they're being treated by what would be a supervisor in this question under these circumstances.
I'd have to clarify the question then. What I'm saying is that at no time do we have any policy that any employee is prohibited from talking or speaking to council, that speaking to your elected representatives and telling the truth, in no way would we sanction anybody suffering any repercussions from that in their employment. I wouldn't.
I think you might be misinterpreting it, but let's go on to Member Wink and Member Martinez.
That's my question.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't believe that personal matters should be ever brought forth in a public setting, and I would perhaps want a little bit of support from our city attorney to that end, if that's appropriate to ask you.
I think the question is whether or not individuals are allowed to contact the city council, employees are allowed to contact the city council. Under the policy manual of the police department, employees are required to follow their chain of command, and the city council is not part of the chain of command. So if they have an issue within their employment, they are required by their departmental policy to move up through their supervisor. I'm not understanding if the question is asking if somebody tried to go around their departmental policy. I'm just not sure what question is directly being asked of this employee.
Thank you very much, City Attorney. Then I think the question should not be included in our discussion.
Member Martinez?
I think we're veering off topic a little bit. We're talking about the after action report, and I think that is kind of outside of that. So I would prefer to stay on topic.
All right, I think we have enough consensus to say that we'd prefer not to have this conversation and that you would use I think you're directly reporting to
I think
Member
what the
Hargrove
mayor,
right now.
as the mayor, you gave her the option to go ahead and answer.
I'm going to retract that. I think it's not a wise thing to do for her right now. I do not believe, if there's something you would like to bring forward via Director Hargrove that you really want us to hear, I am open to that, but I want you to be fully protected in the process.
Okay.
That's what I'm standing
Then
for here.
I'll take back my question, because I think I've already gotten it answered in a way, is that when we expect employees, when we already have people being discouraged from doing reports, when we discourage employees from telling the truth, from being able to come forward and let us know what's going on, and then we don't even protect them to say, if that's going to happen and you're going to tell the truth and we're going to allow any retribution to you, which apparently some people are already aware of, which I was not. I was hoping that this email was the end of it, and that the conversation that happened might have been a little bit emotional, because this is public record now. And for me to ask that was in the surety that we would certainly not ever punish any employee. But since we've made this big deal out of this...
I'm going to interrupt you. You are out of order for what's on our agenda tonight. This is not about a personnel issue. We will leave that to another setting.
Had information provided to us.
We are done.
That the after-action report was not provided because the city attorney told an employee...
That is not what you were talking about. You asked something else.
I want to know if there's any retribution to an employee for just doing their job and telling the truth. And if we're going to go ahead and skirt around some kind of chain of command and not honor whistleblower, kind of expecting employees to just come and tell the truth so that we could do the best job, then shame on us.
Yes.
But I think I've already got the answer. Thank you very much,
I don't think
Mayor.
you have the answer, but your assumptions are yours. Member Cuesta?
Yeah, and I do feel that deserves a response. I know in most companies, large ones, certainly mine as well, there's a whistleblower hotline. You don't put somebody on the spot to say in public if they've suffered retribution. That just puts them in an even worse spot. And so I think that's just, I think that's a weird approach to say, tell us right here, right now, what retribution you may have suffered, even if that suffers you more retribution. There are certainly channels with which she can share that, and I think she should, if there has been. But again, if you feel compelled to answer it, have at it. But I don't think that we should tell you right here, right now, you have to answer that question. I don't think that's fair to you. And so that's, I think, the distinction I would make with Laura Barentine, Councilmember Barentine, is that to say, tell us right now, right here, what happened, isn't fair to her.
Can I ask what avenue I would have to express that, if there is an avenue? How would I go about that?
Can I call in HR? I personally don't know. I assume that that would be through HR, but I
would
would
be
ask
HR.
the city manager or the city attorney, and you certainly should. If you feel that that has been the case, I would encourage you to. If you care to share now, I think that's entirely your choice. I just don't think we should make you do that or compel you to do that. And I do appreciate it either way.
Yeah. I think, shame on us, excuse me, is that what you just said? All right. Or think stop, you're out of order. You are out of order. You are out of order, Member Barentine. Director Hargrove, I'm going to ask a question of Director Hargrove. Could you provide some time within this week processes for complaints that could come to the level of a whistleblower? I would want, of course, for there to be some anonymity for anyone in the city to produce that, and then perhaps we have to create a mechanism for it.
Thank
then
you.
let's do that.
We are exploring a policy about whistleblowing in the city, trying to make that clear. I think the first line would be to talk to their immediate supervisor. If they do not get a positive response or feel that it's not being listened to, that would be part of that process, but I don't want to jumpstart that. But I do think having a policy in place would be a good protection for all of our employees. I just want to state for the record that all employees are encouraged to share information with council. It's only if they were sharing information that their supervisor didn't know or was unaware of that could be problematic in terms of management and would be more detrimental than not.
I'll just go ahead and speak since I'm here. I have a very limited chain of command. So when I emailed you as city council, it was because we were over a year of not having an after-action review. And if you look at my after-action review, it is not similar to Mr. Keck's because his information was not, as I would say, accurate compared to if you look at my report and Mr. Englert's, as the two people who were acting as the emergency managers. So if you can compare my report and Mr. Englert's to Mr. Keck's, they don't line up. So I was feeling frustrated that as of April, our voices still weren't heard. And I thought it was important because it's raining again, it's almost spring, so that I thought you guys needed that accurate information. So I reached out to you to give you my take on it. So to answer your question, since I reached out to you, I feel like I have had some punishment for reaching out to you. I no longer am a part of the police department. I know there's some reasons behind that make sense. It could be coincidental. It could not be coincidental. I can't speak to that reasoning, but it's because I reached out to you, I honestly believe. I've been written up twice. I was not written up since 2013. I know that I've listened to city council meetings since that time, and you say you speak to staff. Many of you speak to staff. I was reaching out trying to do the right thing, but I don't feel like what has happened since that time is because of, I think it was because of my actions. So I hope that doesn't cause me more trouble, but I'm on a 60-day PIP because I reached out to council, I believe. And it was because of code of conduct, because of not following chain of command. But I'm at the top, so I can't reach out to HR because, I report to the police chief. Now I report to Ms. Hargrove. I'm at the end of my chain of command. So there's times when I have no one else to speak to, and I just want you guys to have the information.
Thank you. Would you be open to feedback from any one of us?
Absolutely.
Okay, I would do that privately. Thank you. All right, thank you for your report tonight, both of you, and Ms. Hargrove as well. I do want to say that I believe that this is a combination of things that has happened over a year. It's not any one thing. I didn't see a major disconnect between your report and Mr. Keck's. There's some obvious pieces missing. Absolutely gaps where there's not the same kind of complete specificity to it. But I did want to ask on one just typo, one more. After your new one was, the dates are all corrected, on July 31st, 2018 on page, whatever, it's Commander Englert and I visited the 330 and 30, that's supposed to be 30. That's the only other mistake I had circled originally, but it looks like you got all the dates, so Thank you very much for your time tonight. I think if it's quick, we are almost done.
I had an opportunity to look at the Arapahoe County. If you were looking at the meeting, you saw that I asked what his qualifications were for Nathan Fogg. I've gone over the Arapahoe County one. You both participated in doing that emergency operation plan with the county as well, and I appreciate your work on that. When you sent this email, you sent your qualifications as well. I matched them up with Mr. Fogg, and it seems like you are exactly to the level of his qualifications, except for one, I believe the certification that he's on, the board that he's on. Are you working toward that? Because otherwise you and Nathan Fogg, the county, would be exactly equal to the qualifications, the amount of certifications and level of expertise that you have as an emergency manager. So is that accurate, or did I match them up correctly?
You probably matched them up correctly. I'm a fire marshal. That's my profession. So
I know, that's why it was
I don't-
impressive to see that.
I don't want to be an emergency manager. It just by nature, I mean, a whole chapter of the fire code is emergency preparedness. That's what fire marshals do. So the NIMS qualifications, that's part of being a firefighter. So I have a lot of the qualifications that carry over. So by nature of training, they line up. So it's just a match. I've never applied to be an emergency manager through the SEMA that Nate Fogg is the vice president of, because you have to recertify every 5 years. So I've never applied to be the emergency manager through SEMA. So no, I'm not working towards that unless I need to look for a job. So as a fire,
we're just lucky that you have that piece of it.
Yes.
And I'm sorry. My only understanding was that once your chain of command changed, and it didn't look incidental, that it did look like there was a problem, I wanted at least to make sure that we are above board in public, and I appreciate that you came forward with the information.
Thank
We
you.
need to have employees that feel comfortable, and I'm sorry.
Thank you. We're finished with this topic. Thank you very much, and I appreciate what you've done as well, and hope that as we go forward with the new Arapahoe person, that it's going to be a good, strong relationship with both of you with that appointee. Our last agenda item is actually council members' choice. Would someone like to kick us off? Yeah? Member Wink?
No report.
Come around. Member Sierra?
No report.
Let's just keep going. Member Cuesta?
My annual thanks to city staff on the 4th of July celebration. It was wonderful. I know that we got a fair amount of rain, but it looks like most people held out, and it was great. It gets better every year. More and more things for people to do, and thanks.
No other, Member Martinez?
No report.
No other reports? Are you finished? Member Barentine, no report? No? Mayor Pro Tem? No report? I do have a concern. I have a couple things. First of all, again, 4th of July, thank you as well as Mr. Cuesta. And I also wanted to thank folks in Director Hargrove's office to get Denver Fire out for some of the parade things that happened all around the neighborhoods, and particularly the one around me. That was a very fun event again. I wanted to make note of two things. You've got a calendar invite for July 25th. It's the South Platte Water Renewal Partner Annual Meeting at 7:30 a.m. We're expecting everyone to be there on council. This is our annual required meeting with everyone. Littleton is expecting their full council there, and they expect our full council. So hopefully you've set that aside. I also you got an email today too about a jail tour for Arapahoe County, and they're doing them every Wednesday evening, so take a look at them. You can pick one and go on any of them, but this will have an impact on us because if they do go for a major bond, you need to be informed to realize what kind of impact it could have on us financially, while we also are looking at possible, rate increases and things like that. I think we've got to be really on top of these things together. And then the last thing has to do with emails. I know in the past we have talked about not having emails that go to 3 or more of us, and in the last month alone, I have well over a dozen emails that either came to Mayor Pro Tem and I alone from Member Barentine, or to all of us. And I am uncomfortable with this. I have brought this up before, and I thought we had agreed that we would not email all of us, nor would we email three of us, and that has not stopped. So I would like to get some, I would like to, at this point, and I've asked, this is Member Barentine that's been doing this, I have not seen any from any of the rest of you, but I do want to have this stop, and I want to ask you all, how would you like to go about this? I've asked Member Barentine to stop. She has then forwarded them on to you when I've asked that in the past, so I've not been doing that, but I would like to see something change here. Member Sierra.
I want it stopped as well because you can't respond to them. You can't respond to an email. So I've always been sending my emails directly to the city manager, and I thought we did decide that whenever it was, maybe 2 months ago. But I do want those emails to stop.
Others? Member Martinez?
I would also like the emails to stop. I think we set up our proper way of handling emails to the group, which Councilmember Sierra mentioned, is send it to the city manager and she passes it on to the group. It is frustrating when we can't respond to emails. We can obviously do one-on-one, but it becomes frustrating when we get emails that we can't respond to, so.
I think there are two issues. One is I do believe that it is in a violation of state statute, and I think we're bordering on that. Even if you don't believe it is, then it doesn't allow, and a couple of them did violate because there are chains going between them. And then secondly, which I think is almost more important for us as a team, is it really shuts the rest of us out of a conversation. Only one person gets to talk all the time and say whatever they want. Sometimes it's not correct, and sometimes it's maybe misinformation or something else, I don't know. But it's not a format that I think helps us all feel like we have the same voice and that we can trust what's being said. I can't correct something and don't want to be doing that in a way that would be jeopardizing the rest of us and not being able to hear it from everybody. So I would prefer that these go directly, as we said, to the city manager and to the city attorney and be put into a council request. If it's something that's urgent, have it sent out directly within the next day, that this is an urgent concern and here's our information for it. Does that seem like a problem, and could we continue? Member Cuesta.
Yeah, I guess I should raise my hand here as well. There was one, call it 2-3 weeks ago, where a citizen had sent in a concern. They were a District 4 citizen, and it went to all of council that there was this concern. I did reply all and said, I'll reply to this citizen. That to me was the outfielder saying, I got it, but a better way to do that would have been funneling or triangulating that through the city attorney. I'll personally make that commitment, because yes, I did it within the past 2 or 3 weeks as well. As soon as I did it, I thought I shouldn't have. So yes, I'll do better myself. I can commit to that, yes.
Councilmember Barentine.
The not doing emails privately, and we got that resolved so that everything goes through the city now. And the only people who can go ahead and communicate with all of council is the city manager or the city attorney. And they give things that are inaccurate, that I disagree with, and then they're the only ones who can talk. And the only people who can't have any discussion apparently is council, except for the majority of council who do it through their private emails, because we got
We
some
do
core.
not do that.
We got some core requests, and there were.
Point of information, do any of you use your private emails to communicate with one another?
There are core requests that have
point of-
that out there, and I have the floor right now, but go ahead.
No,
Member
I don't.
Sierra, Member Martinez,
I have the emails,
Member
but
Wink.
that's
Yeah.
okay.
Well, Member Cuesta. All right,
No,
yeah,
I think
so
you're the only one.
I
that-
think we're all committed to not doing that, so continue.
So when we have a majority of council that's going ahead behind the scenes and having discussions, and the minority of council doesn't get any voice to go ahead and speak to other council members, and we have copies of the email, so, they can forward them on. You know that these core requests have been done, and that your emails have shown up in private, you're using your private emails.
People send things to us and we do not respond. That happens
Oh, they were
to you as
responses.
well.
They were responses.
So-
The only way that I could go ahead and respond to all of council and make it open and fair is to go ahead and make sure that when I do anything, that I do it to all of council. It is not a violation of the open meetings, you're right. It's only if you're responding back, at least according to this attorney's opinion. And I haven't responded to anything. I give you the information for what I'm doing, and then you don't have to respond. You can respond to each other privately like you do, but I am at least communicating with all of council at the same time as openly and as honestly as I can. Since I think it's a little bit of a hamstring of the minority of council to do it this way for what you guys are doing behind the scenes, then what I will do is I will just do it publicly, and I'm okay with that, because I think the public has a right to know what we're doing, how we're making the decisions, and if you disagree with it, then you can go ahead and go on the public venue.
So,
But this is an inappropriate hamstringing for just a certain
So
amount of the people.
You have
because-
now said that you will not abide by what we all
Have
agreed
you ever,
to.
have you ever called me? You won't.
I have. I've talked to you face to face. I've done it by email, and I've done it tonight at a meeting.
You won't have the conversation.
I will not, because it might be misinformed the next time. Okay,
I disagree with any of the leadership going and having meetings and representing this council without notifying the council. And
you
yet
know
it
what?
happens
Member
over and over
Barentine,
again.
you have changed the top. It's my council
No,
request. So
It's the same,
I'm gonna
it's the
ask-
same issue.
Point
Point
of
of
order.
order, point of
You're done.
order, point of order, point of order.
Yeah.
The majority of
Point
this
of order.
council just
Out of
keeps trying to
order.
silence the issue.
Member
That's
Point
all.
of
Barentine, you
order.
are out of order. It
Point
is
of
my
order.
issue. I brought it up, and so I guess what I'm going to
You're
ask
right, I
is, can
shouldn't
you
speak
come
to it.
back with a plan? I think if we have to sanction, we have to do something. I know that other councils have dealt with this in the past. I don't want to have to take legal action, but I prefer to have some sort of way. I would like what you want to have out there in a public site for everyone to see at once, where none of us are doing reply, and we can funnel things into that. I've asked for it through the council requests, and that's the format right now. So could you come back to us with it? In the meantime, I'm going to have I think I'm going to block emails from you, and I think that's the only way to keep from doing it, to not have us be in a situation where we're violating state statute, so.
It's okay with me if you don't know what I'm doing, that's fine.
I know the public doesn't understand, anyway, it does, so I'm not sure what else we can do. I do have a lawsuit that was filed in California on something like this. I'd rather not go that route at all, but there are some sanctions that councils can do. I feel like this is a really silly, silly thing that has something to do with power. I don't get it, but
If I may, I'll try to develop other, mechanisms so that we can consider that. That's, some sort of process that would be fair to everyone, and bring that back to council.
And for now, all of council agrees that we should not be doing this, I think is what I've heard. And we'll go forward at that. Thank you.
Do you not hear me agree?
That you're not going
I've
to be
agreed.
sending out.
If the majority of this council is going to keep trying to squash any kind of conversation in the minority from having any voice, everything I do will be public. I will not do anything at all on the city site. If I get any information on that site, it is public, and I will get a public site, and that's where it will go. And what I have to say will be there, and it can be addressed there.
Well,
So
that'll have
I agree. Your city site is safe from me.
Whatever, I guess the city attorney will have to look into that, what the legalities are. But all we're trying to do is make sure, this is all about openness and transparency. That's what this is about, and allowing for everyone to have a voice and not to have one dominate over the rest. That's what this is about. So we will try and have more transparency going forward. We'll all continue to use the council request format, and be careful as we go. All right. Manager's report?
I do have one question.
I'm going to just continue.
Well, can I just ask, do you have a report too from your meeting today?
Yes, it's going to come through
Okay,
the city
that's
manager.
just what I was about to say. Thank you. The city manager of Sheridan asked for a meeting with his mayor, Mayor Olson, and me this morning. So we talked for a little over an hour. I will say that I think we're very lucky to have such accommodating neighbors. They very much understand the issues on the Oxford line, and we're just asking for information on what steps council might take or might consider, and ask that we keep them informed as we move forward. I think that summarizes, what we were talking about. Mr. Granberry, the city manager for Sheridan has done stormwater projects, knows how involved they are and how expensive and time-consuming. So they're very patient, but definitely wanted us to recognize that it impacts their city and their citizens as well. Would you agree that was a
Yeah,
good summary?
There were 3 major things that they wanted us to be aware of, which I think we all are in agreement. One is safety's number one, which is what you said. They want to make sure that we understand it's their city, yet we have this thing going through the right-of-way, and sometimes they think perhaps it's not been our priority over the last many years because it isn't our road that's sinking, it's theirs. So I think it was a very congenial conversation. They get it, that this is hard. They have been going through a huge transformation of their roads and storm sewer in the last several years from their bond that passed. And they want up the plan for a short-term oversight, so.
Yeah, I spoke with Director DeAndrea today about working with their Public Works Director to make sure that we have an immediate response and understanding of how we would deal with another situation there if it were to occur. So we're being more proactive about that cooperation.
I think that covers it. It was really just quite a nice conversation of their really getting how difficult this is for us as well.
Thank you.
Do you have anything else?
No.
City Attorney?
Yes. So I wanted to let council know that I also listened to Ms. Herblan's statement this evening, and I want to remind you that this matter was turned over to outside counsel very quickly after the flood, and that I was not the attorney who advised on this matter. It was outside counsel, and I can't, honestly, I don't have any recollection of any statement between outside counsel and Ms. Herblan, so I can't speak to those matters. But I wanted to make sure that was clarified. Thank you.
You have an amazing ability to be patient. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.